You think you know what betrayal looks like? Try standing in your own throne room while your pack calls for your death. Not because you failed them, because you refused to let them destroy an innocent woman. That's the price of power when wolves forget what honor means. I'm about to show you how an alpha king loses everything in one night and discovers what he's truly made of when the crown becomes a noose. Stay until the end, hit that like, and drop your city in the comments. Let's see where my tribe is watching from. The obsidian doors of Vareth Keep's Grand Council chamber stood 20 feet tall, carved with the history of 9 conquered territories. Each panel depicted a different subjugation: blood rendered in black marble, victory frozen in stone. Valor Draven had walked past these doors 1,000 times without really seeing them. Tonight, he saw nothing else. His hand pressed against the cold surface, feeling the weight of empire push back against his palm. Beyond this threshold, the High Council waited. Beyond this threshold, his entire reign would be measured and found wanting. He was 32 years old. He had ruled Nightrend for 11 years. He had never once doubted his right to the crown. Until now. The doors opened. Torchlight spilled across polished floors like liquid copper. The council chamber rose in concentric circles, each tier occupied by wolves whose loyalty Valor had purchased with land, titles, and the illusion of shared power. 50 men and women who ruled territories from the Frostspine Mountains to the Shadowmere coast. 50 pairs of eyes that had bent to his will since he was 21 years old. Not tonight. Tonight they looked at him like he was prey. High Regent Sarek Vaust stood at the chamber's center, silver-haired and precise as a blade. His ceremonial robes carried the crimson and black of Eastern territories. His expression carried something worse than anger: satisfaction. Valor descended the steps toward the council floor, each footfall echoing in manufactured silence. His own robes felt heavy. The crown felt heavier. 3 months ago, he had married Seraph Avail in this very building, beneath the Eclipse Sanctum's ancient dome. 3 months ago, he believed he understood the geometry of power. 3 months ago, he was a different king. Vaust spoke first. His voice carried the rehearsed quality of a man who had practiced this moment. Your Majesty, the Council convenes under Article 12 of the Nightrend Accord. We invoke our right to question the throne's judgment when the security of the Empire stands compromised. Valor stopped 10 feet from Vaust, close enough to see the older wolf's pulse beating steady in his throat, close enough to smell the mint oil he used to mask the stench of ambition. Compromised by what, Regent? Enforcing the law you broke? Murmurs rippled through the galleries. Not shock. Anticipation. Faust smiled. It was the worst thing Valor had seen all week. Compromised by a queen who arrived bearing accusations against half the council. Compromised by a throne that elevates conspiracy above unity. Compromised by a king who places the word of one woman above the stability of 9 territories. The word one woman landed like a slap. Valor felt his jaw tighten. He had learned young that kings controlled their faces or lost their kingdoms. But standing here watching Vaust weaponize Serapha's existence, something older than strategy woke in his chest. Rage, pure, molten, unpolitical. He forced it down. Forced his voice level. That woman is your queen. She presented evidence of systematic theft across Eastern territories. 8 years of forged records, hidden accounts, grain taxes that disappeared while pack settlements starved. Unless you're claiming she fabricated thousands of pages of your own correspondence? Vaust's expression never changed. That was how Valor knew the trap had already closed. I claim she manipulated you, Your Majesty. I claim she seduced her way into power and now wields it against the very houses that allowed her elevation. I claim she is a threat to everything your father built. The invocation of his father hit exactly where Vaust intended. King Theron Draven had conquered 6 territories through force and 3 through marriage alliances that cost him 2 wives and a daughter. He had taught Valor one lesson above all others. Trust is what weak kings call their epitaph. Valor had believed that lesson until Serapha placed her evidence before him on their wedding night, until he spent hours reading documentation so meticulous it could only have been gathered by someone who understood survival meant precision. Until he realized the woman he married as political decoration possessed a mind sharp enough to dismantle corruption his own intelligence network had missed. Until he started trusting her, and that was the unforgivable sin. Counselor Marenthos stood from the second tier. She ruled the western coastal territories and commanded shipping routes that fed half the empire. Her voice cut through the chamber like winter wind. The queen arrived with nothing, Your Majesty. No family, no influence, no holdings. Yet within weeks, she convinced you to arrest 3 high council members and threaten the regent himself. This is not governance. This is enchantment. Vaelor turned to face her. Marin's eyes held the same calculation he had seen in mirrors his entire life. The math of power reduced to its simplest equation. Eliminate threats before they eliminate you. She's not wrong, came a voice from the third tier. Counselor Drake Venn, master of the northern mining territories. We've all watched this transformation, Your Majesty. You were never a man who acted on emotion. Now you risk civil war over a woman you've known 3 months. The word emotion hung in the air like smoke. Vaelor felt the trap tighten. They were not arguing law. They were arguing his competence, his judgment, his right to rule. They were arguing his manhood. In wolf culture, that argument carried teeth sharper than steel. I risk civil war over justice, Vaelor said. His voice stayed level, but something underneath it began to crack. Over an empire that doesn't rot from within. Over proving that power without accountability is just organized theft. Faust stepped closer. Close enough that their conversation became intimate. Close enough that only the closest council members would hear his next words clearly. Then prove it, Your Majesty. Submit the evidence to independent audit. Let neutral territories examine these accusations. If the Queen's claims hold merit, we will accept judgment. But if they don't, he let the sentence die. Vaelor understood what wasn't being said. If Serapha's evidence failed scrutiny, she would be condemned. Executed, probably. Made an example that would echo through Nightren's history as a warning about women who reached above their station. And Vaelor would be the king who let it happen, or the king who fell defending her. The chamber waited. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Vaelor heard his father's voice. Cold, certain, dead 15 years, but still ruling from the grave. Crowns survive through calculation, not sentiment. He opened his mouth to accept Faust's terms. The words never came, because the eastern gallery doors opened, and Serapha entered. She wore midnight blue, simple enough to avoid ostentation, but cut precisely enough to command attention. Her storm-gray eyes swept the chamber with the same calm certainty she had carried down the wedding aisle 3 months ago. 50 council members turned to stare. Serapha walked to the council floor like she owned it. Vaelor felt his heart kick against his ribs. He had not summoned her, had explicitly told her to stay in the royal quarters until this crisis resolved, had made it clear that appearing before the council during this particular proceeding would be interpreted as provocation. She came anyway. Faust's smile widened. Your Majesty, Serapha said. Her voice carried across the chamber without being raised. She had learned that trick somewhere, the trick of being heard without shouting. I understand the council questions my evidence. This is not the time, Vaelor said quietly. Too quietly. Every wolf in the chamber heard the strain in his voice. Serapha turned to face Faust directly. You propose an independent audit, Regent. Faust inclined his head, a gesture of faux courtesy that made Vaelor's fists clench. I propose truth, Your Majesty. If you fear it, that tells us everything we need to know. Serapha smiled. It was not a warm expression. I don't fear truth, Regent. I documented it for 8 years while you grew fat on stolen taxes. But I accept your terms. Independent audit, neutral territories, complete transparency. The chamber stirred. Faust's smile fractured slightly. However, Serapha continued, I have one condition. Vaelor's blood went cold. This was not the plan. There was no plan. Serapha was improvising in front of 50 council members who wanted her dead. Faust's eyes narrowed. Queens don't negotiate with councils, girl, the word girl echoed. Serapha's expression never changed. This queen does. My condition is simple. If the audit proves my evidence authentic, you don't just lose your titles. You face criminal prosecution for every family that starved while you embezzled their survival, every child who died from hunger while you purchased coastal estates, every pack that fractured because you chose greed over duty. Silence crashed across the chamber. Faust stared at her like she had grown fangs. You're demanding my life. I'm demanding justice, Serapha said. The same justice you pretend to champion. Or does accountability only flow downward in Nightrend? The question hung in the air like a blade. Valor watched Faust's face, watched the calculations spin behind his eyes. The Regent had orchestrated this entire confrontation to force Valor into a corner. Either abandon Serapha or watch the council fracture into war. But Serapha had just flipped the board. Now Faust stood exposed. If he refused her terms, he admitted guilt. If he accepted, he gambled his life against evidence he knew was authentic. There was no good move, only bad options, and worse ones. Faust straightened. His voice carried forced confidence. I accept your condition, Your Majesty. Full audit, complete transparency. And when your fabrications collapse under scrutiny, you will face the same judgment you demand of me. Agreed, Serapha said. The council erupted. Voices overlapped, some shouting support for Faust, others calling for order. A few demanding that Valor intervene. He stood frozen, watching his queen negotiate her own execution, watching his empire splinter in real time, watching everything his father built begin its collapse, and feeling, against every instinct, a surge of something that terrified him more than council rebellion, pride. Faust raised his hand. The chamber quieted. Then let the audit begin immediately, he said. Let neutral territories examine every document the Queen presents. Let truth settle this matter before speculation tears us apart. His eyes met Valor's. Unless Your Majesty objects? It was the final trap. If Valor interfered now, he proved the council's accusations, proved he was ruled by sentiment, proved the crown had weakened. If he stayed silent, Serapha faced judgment alone. Valor heard his father's voice again. A ruler fears enemies he can see. He should fear the ones who arrive invited. He looked at Serapha. Her expression remained calm, but something in her eyes asked a question only he could answer. Do you trust me? Every lesson Valor had learned said no. Trust was suicide in royal politics. Trust was what men called their last mistake. But trust was also what Serapha had given him on their wedding night when she placed 8 years of evidence in his hands. Trust was what she demonstrated by entering this chamber knowing 50 wolves wanted her blood. Trust was the only thing that separated kings from tyrants. Valor turned to face the council. Let the audit proceed, he said. Full transparency, neutral oversight. The Queen has made her case. Let verification prove its merit. Faust's victory smile returned. The council chambers cleared slowly. Protocols demanded formal adjournment, rituals that felt absurd given the violence simmering beneath manufactured civility. Valor waited until only he and Serapha remained on the council floor. The galleries emptied, torches burned lower, shadows grew longer. What were you thinking? His voice came out rougher than intended. Serapha turned to face him. Up close, he could see the tension in her jaw, the slight tremor in her hands she was working hard to control. I was thinking Faust needed to gamble everything or walk away. He chose gamble. Now we have leverage. Leverage? Valor stepped closer. You just wagered your life on an audit controlled by people who want you dead. The audit will be legitimate, Serapha said. Faust can't afford to manipulate it. Too many eyes watching now. Too much at stake. And if it's not? If they find some technicality? Some gap in your evidence? Then I die, she said simply. And you survive. The crown endures. Nightrend continues. Valor stared at her. At this woman who had entered his empire as decoration and become something far more dangerous. A partner. That's not acceptable, he said quietly. Serapha's expression softened slightly. It was the first crack in her armor he had seen all night. You don't get to decide that, she said. I made this choice. I prepared for this outcome. Why? The question came out raw. Why risk everything? She met his eyes. In the torchlight, her storm-gray gaze carried depths he was only beginning to understand. Because some fights are worth dying for. Because I spent 8 years watching children starve while powerful men threw banquets. Because powerless people don't get justice unless someone with power demands it, even if it costs them everything. She paused. Because you're the first king I've ever met who might actually care about the difference between ruling and tyranny. And that's worth protecting, even from yourself. The words hit harder than any council accusation. Valor had spent his entire life believing sentiment was weakness. That attachment made kings vulnerable, that the throne demanded isolation as the price of power. But standing here, watching Serapha face execution with the same calm certainty she brought to everything, he understood something his father never taught him. Isolation was not strength, it was just loneliness wearing a crown. The next 3 weeks moved like glaciers and avalanches. The audit commission arrived from neutral territories. Wolves from the borderlands, the merchant republics, and the free cities. Auditors who owed allegiance to neither Faust nor the throne. Their presence brought some measure of legitimacy to proceedings that felt increasingly like a public execution with paperwork. Serapha spent 16 hours a day in the archive hall, walking auditors through her documentation. Veilor watched from the gallery, pretending to review other state business while actually memorizing every moment. She was extraordinary. Not in the performative way courtiers demonstrated competence. In the quiet, devastating way someone who had survived by precision demonstrated mastery. Every question answered, every document cross-referenced, every accusation supported by 3 independent sources. Faust attended the first 2 days, confident and dismissive. By day 5, he stopped coming. By day 10, his allies started avoiding eye contact in palace corridors. The evidence was irrefutable, but irrefutable evidence had never saved anyone from political murder. On the 14th night, Veilor found Serapha alone in the archive hall. Candles burned low. Documents covered every surface. She looked exhausted in ways that went beyond physical fatigue. "You should rest," he said. She glanced up. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. "Can't. The commission wants clarification on the grain subsidy calculations by morning." Veilor walked to her work table, picked up one of the ledgers. The entries were written in Serapha's precise hand. Dates, quantities, discrepancies highlighted in red ink. "How long did this take?" he asked. 8 years, she said. "Some nights I thought I'd die before finishing. Other nights I hoped I would." She looked at him directly. "I know what you're going to ask. Why I didn't just run. Why I stayed in Faust's household documenting his crimes when I could have disappeared into any territory and started over." The question had occurred to Veilor many times. "Why didn't you?" Serapha set down her pen. Her hands were ink-stained. Her fingers trembled slightly from exhaustion. "Because running doesn't stop the machine," she said. "It just removes you from underneath it. Someone else gets crushed instead. Usually someone with less privilege, less resources, less ability to fight back." She gestured at the documents surrounding them. "These aren't just numbers. They're children who died preventable deaths. Families who fractured under impossible tax burdens. Entire communities that dissolved because powerful men decided greed mattered more than duty. Running would have saved me, but it wouldn't have saved them." Something in Veilor's chest twisted. "You could have died." "I still might," Serapha said, "but at least I'll die knowing I tried. That matters." She looked at him with those storm-gray eyes that saw too much. "You're a king. You understand costs better than anyone. Every choice demands payment. I chose this payment deliberately. I'd make the same choice again." Veilor set the ledger down carefully, moved closer, close enough to see the candlelight reflected in her eyes, close enough to smell the parchment dust and ink that clung to her clothes. "I'm beginning to think," he said slowly, "that I've spent my entire reign confusing strength with brutality, confusing leadership with isolation, confusing power with the absence of vulnerability." Serapha watched him, waiting. "You terrify me," Veilor continued, "not because you're dangerous to the throne, because you make me question everything I thought I understood about wearing the crown." Her expression softened. "Good," she said quietly. "Kings who stop questioning become tyrants. The moment you're certain you're right is the moment you're most wrong." Veilor reached out, touched her hand. Her fingers were cold despite the candles burning around them. "If they find you guilty." "They won't," she interrupted. "The evidence is solid, but if they do—" "Then you let them execute me," Serapha said. Her voice stayed level, but something underneath it fractured. "You don't burn the empire to save one person, even if that person is me." Veilor's hand tightened on hers. "That's not acceptable." "You don't get to decide that," she said, the same words she had spoken in the council chamber weeks ago. "I made this choice. I prepared for this outcome." "I'm the king," Veilor said. "I get to decide a lot of things." Serapha smiled. It was tired and sad and beautiful. "You're the king," she agreed, "which means you carry the weight everyone else gets to ignore, which means you make choices that cost pieces of your soul, which means you live with consequences that would destroy normal people." She squeezed his hand. "That's why you can't let emotion overrule judgment. That's why the crown demands calculation. Your father was right about that much. But he was wrong about trust," Valor said. "Wrong about isolation. Wrong about treating the throne like a fortress where vulnerability equals weakness." "Maybe," Serapha said. "Or maybe he just never met someone worth being vulnerable with." The words settled between them like fallen snow. Valor had been intimate with women before. Court liaisons, political arrangements, physical transactions that felt empty afterward. But standing here, holding Serapha's ink-stained hand in a room full of evidence that might get her killed, he felt something that went beyond desire. Recognition. Like meeting someone who spoke a language he had been screaming in his entire life without knowing anyone else could hear it. The commission delivered its verdict on the 21st day. The council reconvened in the same chamber where this nightmare began. Same obsidian doors, same concentric galleries, same 50 wolves who had called for Serapha's head 3 weeks ago. Different atmosphere, because everyone had seen the preliminary findings. Everyone knew what was coming. High Auditor Kessler stood at the chamber's center. He was a gray wolf from the borderlands, ancient and humorless and incorruptible. His voice carried the weight of someone who had overseen investigations through 4 different empires. "The Commission has completed its review of all evidence presented by Queen Serapha Vale. We have examined 8 years of documentation spanning 14 territories and involving 743 individual transactions." Silence gripped the chamber. "Our findings are unambiguous," Kessler continued. "The evidence demonstrates systematic embezzlement of grain subsidies, manipulation of border taxes, and fraudulent appropriation of emergency relief funds totaling approximately 18 million in imperial currency." Gasps rippled through the galleries. "Furthermore," Kessler said, "we have verified that High Regent Sarek Vaust directly authorized or personally benefited from 93% of these transactions. His complicity is beyond reasonable dispute." All eyes turned to Vaust. The regent sat motionless. His silver hair looked grayer. His confident posture had collapsed into something smaller. "The Commission recommends immediate arrest and criminal prosecution under Articles 7 through 12 of the Nightrend Accord," Kessler finished. "The evidence supports charges of grand theft, abuse of authority, and conspiracy to defraud the crown." He looked directly at Valor. "The throne must render judgment," High Auditor Kessler said. Valor stood. Every eye in the chamber tracked his movement. This should have felt like victory, like vindication, like proof that Serapha's 8 years of documentation had been worth the risk. Instead, it felt like standing on a cliff edge during an avalanche, because Vaust was not finished. The regent rose slowly. When he spoke, his voice carried the hollowness of a man with nothing left to lose. "The Commission's findings are thorough," Vaust said. "I do not contest them." Murmurs of shock spread through the galleries. "However," he continued, "I invoke my right under the ancient provisions." Article 27. Valor's blood went cold. Article 27 was archaic, brutal, designed for a different era when Nightrend was 9 separate territories held together by constant warfare. It allowed condemned council members to challenge the throne's judgment through trial by combat. Winner took everything. Loser died. No one had invoked it in 40 years. Vaust smiled. It was the expression of a dying wolf who planned to take everyone into the grave with him. "I challenge the throne's authority," Vaust said. "I challenge the legitimacy of this prosecution. I challenge the Queen's evidence as the manipulation of a foreign woman who seduced her way to power." His eyes met Valor's. "And I name my champion, Commander Rowan Vex, 4th Legion, 3,000 swords, based 60 miles from the capital." The chamber erupted into chaos. Valor understood instantly. Vaust wasn't challenging him to personal combat. He was calling in military forces still loyal to the regent's authority, forces who would march on Vareth Keep if Vaust gave the order. Civil war. Wrapped in legal terminology. Councillor Marinthos stood from her tier. "The regent has the right to name a champion," she said. Her voice carried calculated neutrality. "Does the throne accept?" All eyes turned to Valor. If he refused, he looked weak, proved he feared military confrontation, gave Vaust's remaining allies ammunition to claim the throne couldn't enforce its own judgments. If he accepted, Night-Wren split into war. Thousands dead. The empire fragmented. Everything his father built reduced to burning territories and mass graves. Serapha sat in the royal gallery. Her expression remained calm, but her hands gripped the armrests hard enough that her knuckles went white. Valor met her eyes across the chamber. She gave the smallest shake of her head. Don't do this. Don't burn the kingdom for me. But Valor was done taking advice, done calculating, done treating power like mathematics, where people were just variables in equations designed to preserve authority. He had learned something these past 3 weeks. Strength was not the absence of feeling. Courage was not the absence of fear. Leadership was not the absence of love. They were all the choices you made despite those things. Valor turned to face Vaust. I accept your challenge, Regent, but I name my own champion. The chamber held its breath. Valor drew his sword. The blade rang against the scabbard like a funeral bell. Myself. The room exploded into shouting, half the council demanding he reconsider, the other half already calculating what his death would mean for succession. Vaust's smile widened. Personal combat, then, he said. You and me. Tomorrow at dawn. In the old arena beneath Vareth Keep. The winner lives, the loser dies, and their cause dies with them. He gestured towards Serapha. If I win, she burns as a conspirator. If you win, I die alone. Those are the stakes, Your Majesty. Valor met the regent's eyes. Tomorrow at dawn, he agreed. The council adjourned in chaos. Valor returned to his chambers alone, dismissed his guards, locked the doors, stood at the window overlooking Night-Wren's capital spread beneath winter stars. Somewhere below, people slept, ate, loved, lived lives that would be destroyed if civil war erupted, lives that depended on him making the right choice. He had just gambled all of them on his ability to kill a man 40 years his senior. The knock on his door came an hour past midnight. Valor knew who it was before opening. Serapha entered without speaking. She wore a simple gray dress. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders. In the candlelight, she looked younger than 26, looked vulnerable in ways she never permitted in public. You're an idiot, she said. Probably, Valor agreed. She crossed to the window, stood beside him. They looked at the city together without touching. You could have refused, Serapha said quietly. Could have negotiated. Could have given Vaust exile instead of execution. Could have preserved peace. I could have, Valor said. Then why didn't you? Serapha turned to face him. Tears tracked down her cheeks. She was not crying. The tears just fell like something beyond her control. Because I'm tired of sacrificing good people to preserve bad systems, Valor said. Because the crown costs everyone something, but it shouldn't cost them their humanity. Because you risked everything to prove that power without accountability is just organized theft. And you were right. He reached out, touched her face, felt the dampness of tears against his palm. Because somewhere in the past 3 months, you stopped being a political arrangement and became the only person in this empire I actually trust. And I'm tired of pretending that doesn't matter. Serapha closed her eyes. You're going to die tomorrow, she whispered. Maybe, Valor said, but at least I'll die being someone I don't hate. That's more than most kings get. She opened her eyes. The storm-gray depths held something that made his chest tighten. I love you, she said. I didn't mean to. I tried not to. But I do. And I'm sorry. Valor pulled her close, felt her body shake against his, felt her breath warm against his neck, felt every wall he had built around himself crack and collapse. Don't apologize, he said quietly. You gave me the only gift that matters. You reminded me what it feels like to be human instead of a crown with a heartbeat. They stood together as the city slept beneath them, as winter stars wheeled overhead, as dawn approached with all its violent promises. Neither of them slept. Neither of them spoke. They just held each other like shipwreck survivors clinging to wreckage while the ocean decided whether to grant mercy or drowning. Dawn came cold and gray. The old arena beneath Vareth Keep dated from Night-Wren's founding. Before empires. Before unity. When 9 territories settled disputes through blood instead of treaties. The space was circular, 50 feet across. Stone walls rose 30 feet high. No decorations, no ceremony. Just ancient rock stained with generations of violence. The council gathered in the galleries above. Witness to history. Or execution. Probably both. Veilor entered from the east gate. He wore simple combat leathers. No crown, no royal insignia. Just a king who had chosen to fight his own battles. Faust entered from the west. He looked older in daylight, smaller, but his eyes held the dangerous focus of men who had already accepted death. High Auditor Kessler stood at the arena's center. The challenge has been issued and accepted, he announced. Combat continues until one champion yields or dies. The victor's judgment becomes law. The loser's cause dies with them. He looked at both men. Do you understand these terms? I do, Faust said. I do, Veilor said. Kessler stepped back. Begin. Faust drew his sword in a smooth motion that betrayed decades of practice. The blade was lighter than Veilor expected, designed for speed instead of power. They circled each other. Veilor felt his heart hammering, felt sweat building despite the cold, felt every lesson his weapons master had drilled into him since childhood. Stay balanced, watch the eyes, anticipate movement. Faust struck first. The blow came fast and low, aimed at Veilor's left knee. Veilor parried, but barely. The impact jolted through his arm. Faust recovered and struck again, high this time. Veilor blocked and countered. Their blades rang against each other like cracked bells. They separated. Faust was smiling. You're stronger, he said, but I'm faster, and I've been killing men since before you were born. He attacked again. 3 strikes in rapid succession. Veilor blocked the first 2, but the third grazed his shoulder. Pain flared. Blood soaked his shirt. The galleries gasped. Veilor pressed the attack, used his strength advantage, drove Faust backward with heavy overhead strikes that forced the older wolf into defense. But Faust was right. Speed mattered more than strength in extended combat, and Veilor was already breathing hard while Faust looked merely focused. This is why young kings die, Faust said between exchanges. They think passion wins wars, but wars are won by men who learn to kill before they learn to care. He struck again. Lightning fast, caught Veilor across the ribs, another cut, more blood. Veilor stumbled backward. His vision blurred. The wound wasn't deep, but it burned like fire. Faust advanced. She's already dead, he said quietly. Only you can hear now. When I finish you, I'm going to drag her to this arena and burn her alive. I'm going to make it last, make it hurt, make it legendary. Rage exploded in Veilor's chest. He attacked with everything he had, no strategy, no technique, just fury hammered into steel. Faust parried easily, let Veilor exhaust himself, then struck back with surgical precision. The blade caught Veilor across the thigh. Deep this time. Veilor's leg buckled. He went down on one knee. His sword felt heavy. His vision tunneled. Faust stood over him. Any last words, Your Majesty? Veilor looked up at the galleries, found Serapha watching from the royal box. Her face was pale. Her hands gripped the stone railing hard enough to leave marks. Their eyes met. And Veilor understood something his father never taught him. Strength was not killing efficiently. Courage was not dying without fear. Leadership was not about winning alone. It was about fighting for something beyond yourself, even when you were losing, especially when you were losing. Veilor surged upward, used his wounded leg to drive his whole body into Faust's chest. They crashed into the arena wall together. Veilor's sword clattered away. Faust's blade scraped across stone. They grappled like wolves. No technique, no elegance. Just 2 men fighting for survival. Veilor was bigger, younger, stronger, but wounded and exhausted. Faust was older, faster, more experienced, but surprised and off balance. They hit the ground hard. Veilor landed on top, drove his fist into Faust's face. Once, twice, 3 times. Felt bone crack under his knuckles. Felt Faust's blood spray across his hands. Faust went limp. Veilor grabbed the regent's dropped sword, pressed the blade against Faust's throat. The arena fell silent. Yield, Veilor gasped. Faust laughed. Blood bubbled between his teeth. Never. Then die, Valor said. He should have done it. Should have ended the threat. Should have driven the blade down and finished what the challenge demanded. But looking at Faust's broken face, Vialor saw something that gave him pause. An old man who had built his identity on power and lost himself completely in its pursuit. Who had betrayed every principle he once held. Who had become a monster because he forgot what he was trying to protect. Valor saw his father. He saw himself. He saw what the crown did to men who let it replace their humanity. Valor lowered the sword. The galleries erupted in shouts, some demanding he finish it, others screaming approval, chaos swallowing reason. Valor stood. His legs screamed in protest. Blood ran down his side. He could barely stand. But he stood. "I could kill you," he said to Faust. "The law demands it. The challenge requires it. You certainly would if our positions were reversed." He threw the sword aside. It clattered across blood-stained stone. "But I'm tired of being the kind of king who solves problems through murder," Valor continued. "Tired of treating power like violence wearing a crown. Tired of becoming my father." He looked at the galleries, at 50 wolves who had gathered to watch execution as entertainment. Seric Faust is guilty of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The evidence is irrefutable. The audit proved it. His crimes deserve punishment. Valor stepped away from Faust's broken form. "But they don't deserve death," he finished. "They deserve exposure, public shame, complete dismantling of his influence and authority. They deserve making him live with what he's done instead of escaping into martyrdom." He turned to High Auditor Kessler. "Strip his titles, seize his holdings, redistribute stolen resources to the territories he robbed, make restitution the punishment, make transparency the consequence, make accountability the law." Silence crashed across the arena. Vialor swayed on his feet, blood loss making the world tilt, pain making everything distant. He looked up at Serapha one more time. She was crying. Actually crying. Not the controlled tears from last night, but ugly, shoulder-shaking sobs. She was also smiling. Valor collapsed. The world went dark. He woke 3 days later in the royal chambers. Bandages covered his chest and leg. Pain medication made everything foggy. Sunlight streamed through windows in ways that hurt to look at. Serapha sat beside his bed. She looked exhausted, beautiful, alive. "You're an idiot," she said again. But her voice carried warmth this time. "How bad?" Valor croaked. "The wounds?" Serapha touched his hand. "You'll live." "The council." She smiled. "They're terrified. Half of them think you're weak for showing mercy. The other half think you're brilliant for avoiding civil war. No one knows what to make of you anymore." "Good," Valor whispered. "Fear is useful." Serapha laughed. It sounded like broken glass being swept into music. "Faust is being held under house arrest pending full restitution proceedings," she continued. 3 other council members resigned rather than face investigation. The eastern territories are stabilizing. "And you?" She paused. "You became the first Night Wren king in history to win a death challenge and choose mercy. The packs are calling you the merciful alpha, the changed king, the wolf who remembered his humanity." Vialor closed his eyes. "I just wanted to stop being the person I hated when I looked in mirrors." "I know," Serapha said softly. "That's why it worked." They sat in silence, comfortable, earned. Then something occurred to Valor. "You said 3 days?" Serapha's expression shifted, became careful. "Yes." "Why? What happened on day 2? She looked away. "Serapha, what happened?" She met his eyes. The storm-gray depths held something that made his chest tighten despite the pain medication. Faust's military forces mobilized anyway. Commander Vex marched 3,000 soldiers toward the capital. They reached the outer districts yesterday morning. Valor tried to sit up. Pain flared across his wounds. Serapha pushed him back down. "What did you do?" he demanded. "What you couldn't," she said quietly. "I negotiated. Used your victory as leverage. Convinced Vex that Faust's cause died in that arena. That continued resistance meant fighting a king who just demonstrated mercy instead of brutality. That there was more honor in standing down than dying for a corrupt regent's pride. And it worked?" Serapha smiled sadly. "It worked. Vex withdrew his forces. The Eastern Territories accepted new council appointments, and Nightrend stayed whole. Barely, but whole. Relief flooded through Valor. Then something else. You saved the Empire. We saved the Empire, Serapha corrected. You by winning, me by consolidating. That's what partners do. Partners, Valor repeated. He liked the sound of that word. Serapha leaned close. Her breath was warm against his ear. But the cost was higher than you know, she whispered. Vex didn't withdraw out of pure reason. He withdrew because I promised him something in exchange. Valor's blood went cold despite the pain medication. What did you promise? Serapha pulled back. Her expression carried weight that went beyond exhaustion. 3 months from now, there's going to be an uprising in the Shadowmere territories. A rebellion claiming independence from Nightrend. Vex knows about it, has known for weeks. He was waiting to see which side to join. She paused. I promised him that when it happens, Nightrend won't crush it immediately, that we'll negotiate first. Try diplomacy before war. Give the Shadowmere wolves a chance to air grievances peacefully. Valor stared at her. You committed the throne to negotiating with rebels, without consulting me. Yes, Serapha said simply. Because you were unconscious, and the Empire was 6 hours from civil war. I made the call. If it was wrong, you can have me executed for treason when you're strong enough to stand. She meant it. Valor could see it in her eyes. She had made an impossible choice while he lay bleeding, had gambled the throne's authority to prevent immediate catastrophe, had acted with the same calculation and courage that defined everything she did, had become exactly the kind of partner a king needed when the crown became too heavy to carry alone. Valor reached out, took her hand, squeezed weakly. 3 months, he said. That's not much time to prepare for a rebellion. No, Serapha agreed. It's not. Then we better get started. She blinked. You're not angry? I'm furious, Valor said honestly. Terrified, uncertain whether you made the right call, and completely in love with you. The words settled between them like dawn after a long night. Serapha's eyes widened, her hand tightened on his. Say that again. I love you, Valor repeated. I didn't mean to, tried not to, but somewhere between your evidence and your courage and your willingness to gamble everything for justice, I stopped seeing a political arrangement and started seeing the only person in this empire I actually trust. Tears spilled down Serapha's cheeks. You're still an idiot, she whispered. Probably, Valor agreed, but I'm your idiot now. She leaned down, kissed him gently. Her lips tasted like salt and hope and terrifying possibility. When she pulled back, her expression carried something that made his chest tighten. The Shadowmere rebellion isn't the only crisis coming, she said quietly. While you were unconscious, I received word from the Northern Territories. The mining clans are organizing. They're demanding representation on the council. Better working conditions. Share of profits instead of fixed wages. How long? Valor asked. 6 months. Maybe less. And? Serapha took a shaky breath, and the coastal merchant guilds are threatening to withhold trade agreements unless you grant them independent oversight of shipping lanes. They're tired of council tariffs eating their profits. The hits kept coming. How long for that? 4 months. Valor processed this. His empire was fracturing in multiple directions simultaneously. The victory over Voust had prevented immediate civil war, but exposed deeper fissures in Nightrend's structure. The old system was collapsing, and he had no idea how to build a new one. We're going to fail, he said quietly. Aren't we? All these crises, all these competing interests. We can't possibly satisfy everyone. Something's going to break. Probably everything. Serapha smiled. It was tired and sad and beautiful. Probably, she agreed. But we'll fail together. And that's more than most rulers get. Together, Valor repeated. The word felt strange. Kings were supposed to rule alone, carry burdens alone, make decisions alone. Isolation was the price of the crown. But isolation was also what made kings into monsters, what made empires into tombs. Valor looked at Serapha, at this woman who had arrived as decoration and become his salvation, who had risked everything to expose corruption, who had saved his empire while he lay bleeding, who loved him despite knowing exactly what the crown would cost them both. All right, he said. Together. Outside, winter sunlight painted the city in shades of silver and gold. Somewhere in those streets, people lived and died and loved and struggled. People who depended on Veilor making choices that would shape their lives. People who deserved better than a king who confused strength with brutality. Better than an empire built on fear instead of justice. Better than rulers who forgot that crowns were supposed to serve kingdoms, not the other way around. Veilor had 3 months before the Shadowmere Rebellion. 6 months before the mining clans organized. 4 months before the merchant guilds revolted. 3 impossible crises. No good solutions, just bad options and worse ones. But for the first time in his reign, he wasn't facing them alone. Serapha stood, kissed his forehead, promised to return after speaking with the council about containment strategies. She left. Veilor lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling his wounds throb in rhythm with his heartbeat, and wondering whether mercy had been wisdom or suicide, whether trusting Serapha would save his empire or destroy it, whether love made kings stronger or just gave them more to lose. The questions had no answers, only consequences that would arrive whether he was ready or not. Outside his window, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy with violence not yet unleashed. Inside his chest, something else gathered. Not quite hope, not quite certainty, just the dangerous conviction that whatever came next, he would face it as himself instead of the hollow thing his father's crown had tried to make him. That had to count for something. It had to. Because if it didn't, they were all damned anyway. The storm broke 3 weeks after Veilor left his sickbed. Not the weather kind. Those were predictable. Winter storms followed patterns carved into mountains over centuries. You could smell them coming in the pine smoke that settled heavy over Vareth Keep when pressure dropped. No, this storm wore council robes and carried grievances sharpened into weapons. Veilor stood in the war chamber overlooking the eastern battlements, studying reports that made his previous wounds feel trivial by comparison. Numbers, troop movements, supply chain disruptions, the administrative violence of empire collapsing in slow motion. Serapha entered without knocking. She had stopped asking permission weeks ago, stopped pretending their partnership followed traditional protocols where queens waited for summons. The merchant guild sent their response, she said. Her voice carried the flatness of someone delivering bad news that surprised no one. Veilor didn't turn from the window. And they're rejecting the compromise. Want full autonomy over coastal trade routes, no council oversight, no royal tariffs, complete independence except in name. Which means? Which means they're 3 weeks from open revolt. Maybe less if the mining clans coordinate their uprising to coincide. Veilor closed his eyes, felt exhaustion settle into his bones like winter settling into stone. He had been king for 11 years, had survived assassination attempts, territorial disputes, and court conspiracies that would have destroyed weaker rulers. But this felt different. Not survival, dismantling, like watching an empire he had inherited dissolve because the foundation was always rotting underneath. What does the council recommend? He asked. Serapha moved beside him, close enough he could smell the parchment dust that clung to her clothes. She had been in the archives again, probably for 16 hours straight. Half want military intervention. Crush the guilds before rebellion spreads. The other half want full capitulation. Grant autonomy to preserve peace. Both options were poison. Veilor understood that with the clarity of someone who had learned statecraft from a father who believed compromise was just slow surrender. Use force and you prove every accusation about tyranny. Become the monster they claim you are. Capitulate and you prove weakness. Show every other territory that rebellion works, that threatening violence gets rewarded. Either way, the empire fractures. Either way, he loses. What do you recommend? Veilor asked quietly. Serapha was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried weight that went beyond political calculation. I recommend you stop thinking like a king who inherited an empire and start thinking like a man who's building something new. Because the old system is dying regardless of what you do. The question isn't how to preserve it. The question is what replaces it. Veilor turned to face her. Storm gray eyes met his without flinching. She had changed these past months, grown harder in some ways, sharper, but also more certain, like someone who had survived drowning and learned to trust water anyway. You're saying let it collapse. I'm saying stop trying to hold together something that was broken from the start. Your father conquered 9 territories through violence and fear. That worked for him because fear was his language. But it's not yours anymore. Not after you chose mercy over murder in that arena. She stepped closer, close enough he could see fatigue shadowing her eyes. You became a different kind of king that day, whether you meant to or not. Now you get to decide what that means. Before Valor could respond, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Heavy, multiple, moving with purpose. The war chamber doors burst open. Commander Rowan Vex entered first. The same military leader who had marched 3,000 soldiers toward the capital before Serapha negotiated his withdrawal. He looked older than his 45 years, scarred, dangerous in the way men become when violence stops being choice and becomes identity. Behind him came 3 other officers, Eastern Territories, Vex's people. They were armed. Valor's hand moved toward his sword. Serapha stepped slightly in front of him, a gesture so instinctive it happened before thought. "Commander," Valor said. His voice stayed level, but something underneath it shifted. "Ready. This is irregular." Vex stopped 10 feet away. His expression carried no hostility, just exhaustion that mirrored what Valor felt in his own chest. "Your Majesty, we need to talk, now, before everything we've built turns to ash." Valor measured him. Vex had been loyal to Voust, had commanded forces that could have ended Night Wren's fragile peace. But he had stood down when Serapha asked, had chosen negotiation over bloodshed. That bought him this conversation. Nothing more. "Talk," Valor said. Vex gestured toward the map table dominating the chamber's center. Detailed charts of Night Wren's territories spread across polished wood. Red markers showed current crisis points. There were 12. 3 months ago there had been 4. "The Shadowmere Rebellion launches in 8 days, Vex said without preamble. "Not 3 months like we thought." They accelerated the timeline. 2,000 wolves, well-armed, well-organized, and they've got support from territories we didn't account for. He pointed to markers Valor hadn't noticed before. Western coastal regions, northern mining settlements, southern trade routes. "They're coordinating," Vex continued. "Merchant guilds, mining clans, Shadowmere separatists, 3 simultaneous uprisings designed to fracture Night Wren beyond repair. And they're launching in 8 days because they know we're not ready." Serapha moved to the table, studied the markers with the same precision she brought to everything. "How do you know this?" "Because they approached me," Vex said flatly. "Offered command of their combined forces. Offered to make me High General of a new confederation built from Night Wren's corpse. Offered everything except the one thing that actually matters." "What's that?" Valor asked. "A reason to trust them more than I trust you," Vex said. He looked at Valor directly. "You spared Voust when every instinct said, kill him. You chose mercy when violence would have been easier. You proved something I didn't think kings could prove anymore." "What?" "That power doesn't have to corrupt completely, that there's still space between tyranny and weakness. That maybe, just maybe, we can build something better than what we inherited." The words landed heavy. Valor felt something shift in his chest, not quite hope, too fragile for that, but possibility, the dangerous kind that got people killed when it turned out to be illusion. "Why are you telling me this?" Valor asked. "Because I'm tired of fighting for men who mistake brutality for strength," Vex said. "Because my soldiers are tired of dying to preserve corruption. Because the Eastern Territories are tired of being treated like conquered subjects instead of parts of a kingdom." He stepped closer to the table, planted his hands on polished wood. "And because if we're going to stop this rebellion without drowning in blood, we need to do something no Night Wren king has ever done. We need to actually listen to what the territories are screaming." Serapha glanced at Valor. Something passed between them. Understanding, recognition, the wordless communication that happens between people who have stopped keeping score. "What are they screaming?" Valor asked quietly. "That the old compact is dead," Vex said. "That conquest and submission don't work anymore. The territories want representation, not domination. Want partnership, not servitude. Want to feel like they're building something together instead of being crushed under someone else's throne." He looked at Valor with eyes that had seen too many battlefields. "They want what you and the Queen have, what you demonstrated in that arena and every day since. Partnership. Trust. The belief that power can exist without requiring one person to kneel while another stands. The war chamber fell silent. Outside, winter wind howled against battlements. Inside, empires trembled on the edge of collapse or transformation. Valor studied the map. 12 red markers. 12 crisis points. 12 territories screaming for change in different languages that all translated to the same desperate truth. The old way was dying, had been dying for years. His father's empire, his father's methods, his father's belief that kings ruled through fear sharpened into law. All of it collapsing under its own weight. Valor could fight it, could mobilize armies, could crush rebellions, could prove that crowns survive through violence like his father taught, could become exactly the monster he had spent 3 months learning not to be. Or he could do something else entirely, something that terrified him more than any battlefield. He could change. Serapha, Valor said. Her name came out rough. How many territories have we lost contact with in the past month? 17, she answered immediately. She had the numbers memorized. Communications disrupted. Trade routes severed. Administrative reports stopped arriving. And how many of those 17 are planning active rebellion? According to Vex's intelligence? All of them. Some openly, some quietly. But all of them preparing for separation. Valor nodded slowly, processing implications that rewrote everything he thought he understood about ruling. Commander Vex, if you were planning this uprising, what would you expect me to do? Vex didn't hesitate. Mobilize overwhelming force. Crush the first rebellion brutally enough to terrify the others. Make an example that echoes through every territory. Standard imperial response. And if I did that, you'd win the immediate battle and lose the empire. Kill enough rebels and you prove their accusations. Become the tyrant they claim you are. Spend the rest of your reign crushing uprisings until eventually one succeeds or you die trying to prevent it. Valor met his eyes. And if I don't, then you're the first Night-Rend king in history to admit the empire needs to change. And that terrifies your enemies more than armies ever could, because they've prepared for violence. They haven't prepared for transformation. The words settled into Valor's chest like stones. Heavy. Immovable. True. He looked at Serapha. She watched him with those storm-gray eyes that saw too much. That understood what he was considering before he fully understood it himself. This will destroy the crown as we know it, he said quietly. Everything my father built, everything the council expects, everything that makes Night-Rend an empire instead of a confederation. Yes, Serapha agreed. It will. They'll call me weak. They will. They'll say I'm surrendering to rebels. Probably. The council will fracture. Half of them will support this. The other half will plot my assassination. Almost certainly. Valor almost laughed. The sound came out strangled. You're not making a compelling case for revolution. Serapha smiled, tired. Beautiful. Devastating. I'm making the only case that matters. The empire is dying anyway. The question is whether it dies taking everyone with it or transforms into something that might actually survive. Your father's way leads to mass graves. This way leads to uncertainty. But uncertainty is still better than guaranteed destruction. She moved closer, took his hand. Her fingers were cold despite the braziers burning around them. You told me 3 months ago that you were tired of being the person you hated when you looked in mirrors. This is what that looks like. This is the cost of choosing humanity over heritage. Valor felt something crack inside his chest. Not breaking, opening, like ice giving way to water underneath. He turned to Vex. When does the rebellion launch? 8 days. How long to arrange a meeting with their leadership? Vex blinked. You want to negotiate? I want to talk, Valor corrected. Before swords get drawn, before positions harden, before we all commit to violence because we're too proud to admit there might be another way. He gestured to the map. It's 12 red markers. It's territories screaming for change. Get me a meeting with the Shadowmere leadership, the merchant guild representatives, the mining clan elders, everyone planning uprising. Get them in the same room within 4 days. That's impossible, one of Vex's officers said. They won't trust it. We'll think it's a trap. Then make them trust it, Valor said. Tell them I'm coming unarmed. Tell them I'm bringing only the Queen and Commander Vex. Tell them I'm not negotiating surrender. I'm negotiating transformation." "What does that mean?" the officer asked. Valor met Serapha's eyes, saw understanding there, saw support, saw the same dangerous conviction that had carried her through 8 years of documenting corruption while survival meant silence. "It means Night Wren changes or Night Wren dies," Valor said. "And I'd rather change than become my father's corpse wearing a crown." Vex studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll arrange it," he said. "But Your Majesty, if this goes wrong, you're walking into a room with people who want you dead. No guards, no protection, just you, the Queen, and me against hundreds of wolves who have spent months preparing for war." "I know," Valor said. "You could die. I could die in my sleep. At least this way I'll die trying to build something instead of preserving rot." Vex's expression shifted, something that might have been respect. 4 days, he said. "I'll send word." He left with his officers. Their footsteps echoed down stone corridors until silence returned. Serapha was still holding Violor's hand, still standing close enough he could feel her breath against his neck. "You're insane," she said quietly. "Probably. This will never work." "Probably not. The council will explode. Half of them will demand your abdication. The other half will start civil war." "Almost certainly. So why are you doing this?" Violor pulled her closer, felt her body against his, felt her heartbeat through velvet and silk and all the armor people wore to survive power. "Because you taught me something these past months," he said. "You taught me that powerless people survive through precision, through documentation, through gathering evidence that powerful people can't ignore, through making truth carry consequence." He touched her face, felt the warmth of her skin against his palm. "Well, I'm powerful now. Which means I have a responsibility to use that power for something besides self-preservation. And if that costs me the crown, at least I'll lose it being someone I don't hate." Serapha kissed him, fierce, desperate, full of everything words couldn't carry. When she pulled back, tears tracked down her cheeks. "I love you," she whispered, "and I'm terrified we're about to die." Valor held her close, felt winter wind rattle the windows, felt empire trembling on the edge of transformation or collapse. "Then we'll die together," he said. "And that's more than most rulers get." The next 4 days moved like avalanches. Word of the proposed meeting spread through council chambers like fire through drought-dead forests. Some councilors praised Valor's courage, others condemned his weakness. Most just calculated which side would benefit them more when everything inevitably collapsed. Valor spent 18 hours a day preparing, not military strategy, not defensive positions, but arguments, philosophy, the framework for what Night Wren could become if everyone stopped treating survival as zero-sum. Serapha worked beside him, drafting proposals, anticipating objections, building the architecture of revolution disguised as governance reform. They barely slept, barely ate, barely spoke except about constitutional structures and power-sharing frameworks and representation models borrowed from republics that had survived longer than empires. On the third night, Valor found her asleep at the war table, head pillowed on documents outlining territorial autonomy agreements. Ink stained her fingers. Exhaustion shadowed her eyes even in sleep. He carried her to their chambers, laid her on silk sheets, watched her breathe in the candlelight, and felt terror so profound it made previous fears feel trivial. Not fear of death. He had made peace with mortality in that arena against Vaust. Fear of failing her, of dragging her into transformation that ended in execution, of proving that kings who tried to change empires just became cautionary tales about sentiment destroying sovereignty. Fear that love made him weak instead of strong. That trust was still just suicide wearing hope's costume. Serapha's eyes opened, found his in the darkness. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Too many ways this goes wrong." She sat up, took his hand, pulled him onto the bed beside her. "Name 3, she said. Valor almost laughed. This was her way, forcing him to articulate fear so it stopped being formless terror and became manageable problems. 1, he said. "We walk into that meeting and they kill us immediately. 2, they reject everything we propose and launch coordinated rebellion anyway. 3, the council stages a coup while we're gone, and we return to civil war." Serapha nodded. "Good. Now tell me the version where we survive." "That's harder." "I know. Do it anyway." Valor was quiet for a long moment, then spoke slowly, carefully, like someone building bridges across chasms. 1. We walk into that meeting and they listen because we're offering something they didn't expect. Power sharing instead of domination. Partnership instead of submission. 2. They accept partial transformation because partial transformation is better than total war. 3. The council splits but doesn't fracture because enough members recognize that change is inevitable and controlled change beats collapse. Possible? Serapha asked. Barely. Better than nothing. Is it though? Valor turned to face her. Is bare possibility better than certain death? Is hope that fragile worth the cost? Serapha's expression softened. She touched his face, traced the scar along his jaw left from Faust's blade. Hope is always fragile, she said. That's what makes it valuable. Certainty doesn't require courage. Only uncertainty does. Only the choice to try despite knowing you'll probably fail. She leaned close, forehead against his. You asked me once why I didn't run when I could have. Why I stayed documenting corruption when escape meant survival. Remember what I said? Running doesn't stop the machine, just removes you from underneath it. Serapha nodded. This is the same thing, larger scale, higher stakes, but same principle. We can preserve the empire as it exists and watch it crush everyone underneath. Or we can try changing it, and maybe, just maybe, build something that doesn't require constant crushing to function. What if we fail? Then we fail trying. And that matters. Because every person who tries and fails makes the next attempt slightly less impossible. That's how systems change, not through single victories, through accumulated failures that prove the attempt is worth making. Valor pulled her close, felt her heartbeat against his chest, felt everything they were risking pulse between them. I'm afraid, he admitted, not of dying, of failing you, of proving that kings who trust become corpses who believe too much. Serapha kissed him. Soft. Certain. You already proved that wrong, she whispered, the moment you chose mercy over murder. The moment you trusted me with power instead of treating me like decoration. The moment you decided humanity mattered more than heritage. She pulled back, met his eyes in candlelight. Now you just have to prove it again. In front of people who have every reason not to believe you. That's all. Valor almost laughed. That's all. That's all, she confirmed. They lay together in silence, not sleeping, just breathing, holding each other while Empire trembled outside their window. Dawn came too fast. Commander Vex arrived before sunrise with horses and minimal guard. The meeting location was 60 miles southeast. Abandoned fortress called Raven's Edge. Neutral territory. Defensible enough that rebels felt secure. Remote enough that council couldn't easily interfere. Perfect place for negotiation or execution. Valor and Serapha rode in silence. The landscape changed from palace grandeur to frontier roughness. Stone gave way to forest. Cultivation gave way to wild. Empire gave way to the territories conquest had never fully digested. They reached Raven's Edge as the sun cleared the eastern mountains. The fortress loomed against winter sky like a broken tooth. Ancient walls, collapsed towers, proof that empires crumbled regardless of how permanent they seemed. Wolves waited inside, not hundreds like Vex predicted. Thousands. They filled the fortress courtyard, lined the broken battlements, occupied every space that could hold bodies, all of them armed, all of them watching. Valor's horse stopped at the fortress entrance. He could feel their hatred, not personal, structural. The accumulated rage of people crushed under systems designed to keep them powerless. He dismounted, Serapha beside him, Vex flanking them both. 3 people against an army. The crowd parted, creating a corridor toward the fortress's main hall, neither welcoming nor hostile, just waiting. Valor walked forward. Each step felt like crossing distance measured in miles instead of feet. Each breath tasted like iron and smoke and possibility that might be delusion. The great hall was barely standing, roof collapsed in places. Walls scarred by centuries of warfare. But someone had cleared the debris, arranged tables, created space for gathering. At the hall's center stood 3 figures. First, a woman in her 50s, silver-haired, scarred. Commander Kessa Thorn of Shadowmere Territories, the rebellion's military leader. Second, a man in merchant gray, 40s, sharp-eyed, Counselor Davin Osk, Master of Coastal Trade Routes, the Merchant Guild's representative. Third, a younger man, 30s, covered in coal dust and anger, Jarek Venn, mining clan elder, voice of the Northern Territories. They watched Veilor approach with expressions that ranged from suspicion to outright hostility. Kessa spoke first. Her voice carried across broken stone like a blade across a whetstone. King Veilor, Queen Serapha, you requested this meeting. We granted it, not because we trust you, because we're curious what words a doomed empire thinks will save it. Veilor stopped 10 feet away. Close enough for conversation, far enough to avoid immediate violence. I didn't come to save the empire, he said. I came to help kill it. Silence crashed across the hall. Kessa's eyes narrowed. Explain. The empire you're rebelling against was built by my father through conquest and maintained through fear, Veilor said. It's a system designed to concentrate power in one throne and treat territories like subjects instead of partners. That system is dying, has been dying since I took the crown, possibly since my father built it. He gestured at the gathered rebels, at thousands of wolves watching from collapsed walls and broken battlements. You're not the first territories to rebel. You're just the first ones coordinated enough to actually fracture Nightrend beyond repair. And honestly, you're right to do it, because the empire as it exists deserves to fall. Davin Osk stepped forward. His merchant gray robes were travel-stained, but his eyes stayed sharp. Pretty words, Your Majesty, but words don't change structures. You wear the crown your father wore. You command the armies he commanded. You benefit from the system he built. Why should we believe you want to destroy it? Because I already started, Serapha said. Her voice cut through the hall like winter wind. When I documented Regent Voust's corruption, when I exposed systematic theft across eastern territories, when I proved that power without accountability is just organized crime wearing ceremonial robes. She stepped beside Veilor, faced the rebel leadership without flinching. We arrested council members, stripped titles, redistributed stolen resources, made transparency the price of authority. Not because we wanted to preserve the empire, because we wanted to prove something different was possible. Jarek Venn spat on broken stone. His gesture carried more contempt than words. You arrested a few corrupt officials. Congratulations. The mining clans are still dying in collapsed tunnels while you live in palaces. The coastal merchants are still crushed under tariffs that feed council fortunes. Shadowmere is still treated like conquered territory instead of equal partner. He pointed at Veilor. Your reforms are cosmetic, surface changes that leave the foundation intact. We're not rebelling against individual corruption. We're rebelling against the entire structure that makes that corruption inevitable. Veilor met his eyes. And you're right. The hall stirred, murmurs rippling through thousands of wolves. You're right, Veilor repeated louder. The structure is broken. Reforming individual actors doesn't fix systematic problems. That's why I'm not here to negotiate surrender. I'm here to negotiate transformation. He moved to the broken table at the hall's center. Spread documents Serapha had prepared across scarred wood. Constitutional reform. Territory representation. Shared governance. Autonomous regional authority. Revenue sharing frameworks. Independent oversight. Everything you're fighting for. Not as concessions, as foundations for what replaces the empire. Kessa approached the table, studied the documents without touching them. This is a council proposal? No, Veilor said. This is what the Queen and I drafted. The council doesn't know about it. Half of them would call it treason. The other half would call it suicide. They're probably both right. Why? Kessa's voice carried genuine confusion. Why would a king propose dismantling his own authority? Because authority that requires constant violence to maintain isn't authority, Serapha said. It's just terror that hasn't collapsed yet. And my husband is tired of being the kind of king who rules through fear. Veilor looked at the rebel leaders, at Kessa's scars, at Davin's suspicion, at Jarek's barely contained rage. I can't undo my father's conquest, he said. Can't restore what was destroyed. Can't erase the violence that built Nightrend. But I can stop repeating it. Can build something different from the rubble. Can prove that power doesn't have to corrupt completely. He placed his hand on the documents. This is my proposal. Full territorial autonomy within a federation framework. Regional councils with equal representation. shared revenue from trade, mining, and agriculture, independent judicial oversight, constitutional limits on royal authority. Everything that makes this an alliance instead of an empire. What's the catch? Davin asked, his merchant's instinct sensing hidden costs. The catch is it requires trust, Valor said. From you. From me. From territories that have every reason to hate each other. The catch is it's never been done successfully. Every previous attempt at imperial transformation collapsed into civil war or fragmented into weak city-states that got conquered by the next empire. He looked at them directly. The catch is it might not work, but the alternative is guaranteed failure. Either we fight and destroy each other, or we try building something new and maybe, just maybe, prove that empires can transform instead of just dying. Silence settled across the hall, heavy, fragile, full of centuries of violence trying to become something else. Jarek spoke first. His voice carried less anger now, just exhaustion. My people are dying in mines that collapse because safety costs profit. My children work 16-hour days because wages don't cover survival. My clans have been crushed under taxes designed to fund wars we didn't choose and conquests we didn't support. He stepped to the table, looked at the documents like they might be poison. If we accept this, what changes? Actually changes. Not promises. Facts. Mining territory autonomy, Serapha said immediately. She had memorized every detail. Regional control over safety standards and profit sharing. Representation on resource allocation councils. Independent oversight of working conditions. Constitutional requirement that mining communities benefit proportionally from resources extracted from their land. And if the council rejects this, so what? Then the council fractures, Valor said, and we build the new system from territories willing to try. Start with whoever's ready, prove it works. Let success attract the holdouts. You're proposing civil war with your own council, Kessa said. I'm proposing transformation whether the council agrees or not, Valor corrected. They can join. They can resist. Either way, change is coming. The only question is whether it's controlled or catastrophic. Davin studied the documents, his merchant's eyes calculating costs and benefits with brutal precision. The coastal trade provisions, he said, full guild autonomy over shipping routes, no royal tariffs, independent oversight. This costs the crown approximately 30% of annual revenue. Yes, Valor agreed. Why would you accept that? Because 30% of revenue from a stable federation is better than 100% of revenue from an empire actively collapsing. Because sustainable systems require equitable distribution. Because I'd rather be a moderately wealthy king of territories that don't hate me than a rich tyrant waiting for assassination. He met Davin's eyes. And because it's the right thing to do, which apparently matters to me more than it should. The merchant almost smiled. Almost. Kessa's hand finally touched the documents. Her scarred fingers traced constitutional provisions, territory representation frameworks, power-sharing agreements. This requires the crown to relinquish unilateral authority, she said. Requires consultation with regional councils for any major decision. Requires transparency. Requires the king to become first among equals instead of absolute sovereign. Yes, Valor said, your father would call this weakness. My father's dead, and his empire is dying. I'd rather be weak and survive than strong and become a corpse ruling ashes. Kessa looked up, met his eyes. Hers were hard, calculating, measuring truth against history. The Shadowmere territories have been conquered subjects for 37 years, she said. 3 generations of wolves who never knew partnership. Only submission. You expect us to trust that you're different, that this isn't just another manipulation designed to delay inevitable rebellion until you're better positioned to crush us. I don't expect trust, Valor said. I expect verification. Everything in those documents includes enforcement mechanisms. Independent oversight. Constitutional protections you can invoke if I violate terms. Treaties other territories witness so I can't backtrack privately. He stepped closer to the table, to these 3 people who held rebellion in their hands. I'm not asking you to believe I'm good. I'm asking you to believe the system we're building makes my goodness irrelevant, that structures matter more than individual virtue, that accountability works better than hoping rulers stay benevolent. Serapha moved beside him, her presence solid, certain. We spent 3 months learning this the hard way, she said, learning that evidence matters more than character, That transparency prevents corruption better than hoping powerful people stay honest. That systems outlast individuals. She looked at the rebel leaders. You taught us that. When you organized, when you coordinated, when you proved that powerless people become powerful through precision and documentation and making truth carry consequence. Now we're trying to build a kingdom based on those principles instead of opposing them. The hall was silent except for wind whistling through broken walls. Kessa, Davin, and Jarek looked at each other. Some wordless communication passing between them. Years of planning, months of preparation, weeks of believing violence was the only path forward, all of it trembling on the edge of transformation. Finally, Kessa spoke. We need time to discuss this with our territories. This isn't a decision 3 people make, it's a decision thousands make. We'll take your proposals, study them, present them to our councils, get consensus. She looked at Veilor. We'll have an answer in 14 days. Until then, we suspend active rebellion. No attacks, no escalation. Conditional ceasefire while we evaluate whether your proposals are genuine transformation or sophisticated trap. 14 days, Veilor agreed. But understand this clearly, Your Majesty, Kessa continued. If we detect deception, if we find hidden provisions designed to undermine autonomy, if this turns out to be manipulation instead of genuine reform, we don't just resume rebellion, we escalate it, and we make it personal. Understood, Veilor said. Davin stepped forward, his merchant's caution warring with something that might be hope. One more condition, he said. During these 14 days, you implement one provision immediately. As proof of good faith, something significant enough to demonstrate genuine commitment. Name it, Veilor said. Release all prisoners currently held for debt violations in coastal territories. Forgive outstanding balances. Demonstrate that you're willing to sacrifice revenue for principle. If you're serious about transformation, prove it now, not in 14 days. Today, Veilor felt Serapha's hand touch his back. Light pressure, support, trust. He thought about council reaction, about revenue loss, about precedent this established, about his father's voice screaming from beyond the grave that this was weakness. Then he thought about Serapha risking execution to expose corruption, about choosing mercy over murder in that arena, about becoming a different kind of king. Done, he said. I'll issue the order before we leave. Full debt forgiveness, immediate release, compensation for families affected by debt imprisonment, implemented today. Davin's expression shifted. Not quite trust, but something adjacent. Jarek moved to the table, placed his coal-stained hand on the documents. 14 days, he said. We'll have our answer. But know this. If we reject these terms and resume rebellion, it's not because we're unreasonable. It's because we've learned that power rarely gives up authority voluntarily, that promises mean nothing without enforcement, that hope is what powerful people sell to keep powerless people compliant, while nothing actually changes. His eyes held decades of betrayal. Prove you're different, he said. Prove transformation isn't just oppression-wearing reform's costume. Prove that kings can actually change. Then maybe, just maybe, we'll believe empires can too. Veilor and Serapha rode back to Vareth Keep in silence. Commander Vex led their minimal guard. The fortress disappeared behind them. Winter landscape stretched ahead, empire trembling between transformation and collapse. They were 10 miles from the capital when Vex pulled his horse alongside Veilor's. The council is going to explode, he said quietly. I know. Half of them will demand your abdication, call you a traitor to your father's legacy. I know. The other half will start planning assassination. Can't let a king who gives away power stay on the throne. Veilor met his eyes. I know. Vex was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. Was it worth it? Trading certainty for possibility. Trading empire for federation. Trading absolute authority for partnership. Veilor looked at Serapha riding ahead, her back straight, her presence unwavering. The woman who had taught him that powerless people survive through precision, who had survived 8 years documenting corruption when silence meant safety, who had risked execution to prove that truth mattered more than self-preservation, who had chosen him despite knowing exactly what the crown would cost them both. Yes, Veilor said, it was worth it. They reached Vareth Keep as sunset painted the palace in shades of copper and blood. The council was waiting, all 50 members assembled in the Great Hall, not emergency session, ambush. They had learned about the meeting, about the proposals, about debt forgiveness already being implemented, about transformation happening without their consent. High Counselor Marin Thoss stood at the chamber's center. Her expression carried rage wrapped in protocol. "Your Majesty," she said. Her voice echoed across marble and malice. "The Council invokes emergency session under Article 9. We question the throne's judgment. We question your authority. We question whether Night Wren can survive under a king who negotiates with rebels and surrenders imperial power without consultation." Vaelor descended the steps into the council chamber, Serapha beside him. They walked together like they had walked into Raven's Edge Fortress. Partners. "I didn't surrender imperial power," Vaelor said, his voice carried across the hall. "I propose transforming it into something that might actually survive. Because the Empire as it exists is already dying, you just haven't accepted it yet." Councillor Drake Venn stood from his tier. His northern territories had mining interests, had profit built on the exploitation Jarek described. "You had no right to offer concessions without council approval," he said. "No right to promise territory autonomy. No right to forgive debt that feeds imperial revenue. You've overstepped your authority as king." The irony was so profound Vaelor almost laughed. "I overstepped my authority," he said slowly, "by trying to prevent civil war, by offering partnership instead of domination, by proving that power can exist without requiring constant violence to maintain it." He looked at the 50 counselors watching from their elevated tiers. "You're angry because I'm changing rules designed to benefit you at everyone else's expense. Because transformation threatens your privilege. Because partnership requires giving up the advantages conquest granted." He stepped toward Marin, close enough that only the nearest counselors would hear clearly. "But here's the truth you already know. The mining clans are organizing. The merchant guilds are unified. The Shadowmere territories are ready for war. And you have exactly 2 choices. Transform willingly, or get destroyed by rebellion you can't prevent." Marin's eyes narrowed. "You're threatening the council?" "I'm stating facts," Vaelor said. "Facts you're ignoring because accepting them requires admitting the Empire is broken. That your father's and grandfather's conquest created systems that were always temporary. That every empire eventually faces this choice, transform or collapse." He turned to address the full council. "I'm choosing transformation. You can join me. You can resist. Either way, change is coming. The only question is whether it's controlled or catastrophic." The chamber erupted, counselors shouting, some demanding Vaelor's abdication, others calling for military response to rebel territories. A few voices supporting transformation, but drowned out by fury. Chaos. Beautiful. Terrible. Inevitable. Vaelor stood in the center of it, watching his empire fracture in real time, watching everything his father built begin its dissolution, and feeling, against every instinct, a strange calm, because this was the point of no return, the moment where crowns either survive through violence or transform through courage, the moment where kings become tyrants or something else entirely. Serapha's hand found his, her fingers laced through his, solid, certain, present. "Together," she whispered. "Together," he agreed. The council chamber doors burst open. Commander Vex entered with a dozen officers, not threatening, just present, standing behind Vaelor in a display that answered questions about military loyalty. Behind them came something else. Crowds. Not counselors, not nobility. Common wolves from Vareth Keep's lower districts, from territories surrounding the capital, from communities that had spent generations watching power concentrate while they starved. They filled the gallery spaces, lined the corridor outside. Their presence violated every protocol. Commoners didn't enter council chambers during official sessions, but they came anyway, because word had spread about debt forgiveness, about constitutional proposals, about a king who chose transformation over tradition, about hope that might not be delusion. High Counselor Marin stared at the crowds. Her face went pale. "This is irregular," she said. "Commoners have no authority to attend council proceedings. Neither did queens 3 months ago," Serapha said, "until one arrived bearing evidence you couldn't ignore. Rules change, traditions evolve, empires transform, or they die." She looked at Marin directly. "You can remove these people. You can reassert traditional authority. You can prove that power still belongs exclusively to the privileged. And you can watch rebellion spread because you chose protocol over survival. Or you can accept that the empire just changed, that the choice isn't whether to transform, just whether to participate in that transformation or get left behind. The chamber fell silent. 50 counselors, hundreds of common wolves, one king, one queen, all of them balanced on the edge of something that had never been done successfully. Transformation of empire through choice instead of conquest. Federation built from domination's rubble. Partnership emerging from submission's grave. Vialor looked at the assembly, at counselors who wanted him dead, at crowds who might believe hope wasn't suicide, at Serapha who had taught him that power without accountability was just organized theft, at Commander Vex who had chosen trust over rebellion, at the empire his father built trembling between transformation and collapse. He drew breath. Let it fill his chest. Let certainty settle into his bones, then spoke words that would either save Nightrend or destroy it completely. The council is dissolved, he said, effective immediately. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Marin's face went from pale to furious. In its place, Vaelor continued, we establish a constitutional assembly, equal representation from all territories. Nobility, commoners, mining clans, merchant guilds, Shadowmere leadership. Everyone who lives in these territories gets voice in what replaces the empire. He looked at the crowds filling illegal spaces. 6 months to draft a new compact, new governance structures, new power-sharing frameworks, new constitutional limits on royal authority, everything that makes this a federation instead of an empire. His voice rose. At the end of 6 months, every territory votes. Accept the new compact or separate peacefully. No warfare. No conquest. No forcing unity through violence. Just honest choice about whether we build something together or go our separate ways. The chamber exploded into chaos again, but different chaos. Not just fury, confusion, hope, terror, possibility. Everything transformation carries. Marin pushed through the crowd toward Vaelor, her rage barely contained. You just destroyed your father's legacy, she hissed. Destroyed everything the Draven line built. Destroyed the empire itself. Vaelor met her eyes without flinching. Good, he said. My father's empire was built on conquest and maintained through fear. It deserved to be destroyed. Now we get to build something better from the rubble. Or die trying, Marin spat. Or die trying, Vaelor agreed. But at least we'll die being people we don't hate. That's more than Empire ever offered. Marin stared at him, then turned and left, taking a dozen counselors with her, walking out in protest that would probably become active resistance. But 40 counselors stayed. The crowd stayed. Commander Vex stayed. Serapha stayed. And Vaelor understood something his father never taught him. Empires were built through conquest, but kingdoms were built through choice, and maybe, just maybe, choice created foundations that lasted longer than fear. The assembly dissolved slowly, crowds filtering out, counselors departing with expressions ranging from shock to calculation to something that might be support. Vaelor and Serapha stood alone in the chamber as torches burned low. We just committed revolutionary transformation, Serapha said quietly. Changed the fundamental nature of governance without any guarantee it will work. I know. Marin is going to raise forces against us, probably within weeks. I know. The Shadowmere territories might reject the new compact anyway. Decide separation is safer than federation. I know. So we might have just destroyed the empire and gained nothing, created chaos without achieving transformation. Vaelor pulled her close, felt her heartbeat against his chest, felt everything they had risked pulse between them. Possibly, he said, but we'll face it together. And that's worth every risk. Serapha looked up at him, storm-gray eyes holding depths that still amazed him. I love you, she said, and I'm terrified we just made the worst decision in Nightrend's history. Vaelor kissed her, gentle, certain. Then we'll make it the best decision, he said, or die trying, together. Together, she agreed. Outside, winter stars wheeled overhead. Empire trembled between transformation and collapse. And two people who had arrived as strangers became partners who might just change history or become its most spectacular failure. Either way, they would face it as themselves. Not crowns, not thrones, not the hollow things power tried to make them. Just two wolves who chose humanity over heritage, who chose partnership over domination, who chose hope over certainty. And proved that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to become the monster inheritance demands. The betrayal came on the 9th day. Not from enemies. Vaelor had prepared for that, had anticipated resistance from Marin's faction, had positioned loyal forces around the capital, had built contingencies for every external threat. But betrayal never comes from the direction you're watching. It comes from the blind spot, the trusted corner, the person standing close enough to know exactly where the blade needs to go. Vaelor was in the Constitutional Assembly Hall when the news arrived. 300 delegates from across Nightrend's territories, arguing over governance frameworks and power-sharing provisions. The air smelled like parchment and possibility, and the sweat of people trying to build something that had never existed. Commander Vex entered through the eastern gallery. His expression carried weight that made Vaelor's stomach drop before words were spoken. "Your Majesty, we need to talk. Now. Privately." The tone said everything. Vaelor excused himself from the assembly, followed Vex into a side chamber used for smaller negotiations. Stone walls, single window, defensible space. Serapha was already there. Her face was pale. Storm gray eyes held something Vaelor had never seen before. Terror. "What happened?" Vaelor demanded. Vex closed the door, locked it. When he turned back, his military composure had cracked into something raw. "We received intelligence from the Shadowmere territories," he said, "from Commander Kessa's network. Information they uncovered while evaluating your constitutional proposals." He paused. Vaelor could see him assembling words, trying to find gentle ways to deliver violence. "Just say it," Vaelor ordered. Vex met his eyes. Queen Serapha's evidence against Regent Faust, the 8 years of documentation, the forged signatures, the hidden accounts, all of it. What about it? "It was real," Vex said, "but incomplete. Deliberately incomplete, because the conspiracy was larger than anyone knew. Faust wasn't the architect. He was middle management." Cold spread through Vaelor's chest. Middle management for who? Vex looked at Serapha. Something in his expression made Vaelor's heart stop. "For Seric Faust and his co-conspirator," Vex said quietly. "High Regent Soren Vale." The name landed like a blade between ribs. Serapha's father. The man who had raised her, sheltered her, supposedly protected her within Faust's household while she documented corruption. The man who had been dead for 6 years. "That's impossible," Vaelor said. "Soren Vale died before Serapha ever came to court, before the wedding, before any of this started." "That's what we thought," Vex said. "What everyone thought. But Kessa's people found records. Financial transactions continuing after his supposed death. Communications between Faust and someone using Vale's private cipher. Instructions for maintaining the embezzlement network." He placed documents on the table between them. Ledgers. Letters. Proof that fractured reality. "Soren Vale faked his death 6 years ago," Vex continued. "Went underground to avoid investigation. Left Serapha in Faust's household as his eyes and ears. As insurance that if the conspiracy ever got exposed, she could control the narrative. Could ensure only certain people got implicated while the real architects remained hidden." "No," Vaelor said. The word came out strangled. "That doesn't make sense." Serapha exposed the conspiracy, risked execution, nearly died proving corruption existed. "She exposed part of it," Vex said, "the part that protected her father, the part that made Faust the villain while Vale escaped justice. Think about it. 8 years of documentation, and somehow she never found evidence implicating her own father? 8 years of forged signatures, and she never noticed his?" Vaelor turned to Serapha. She stood against the far wall, silent. Her hands were shaking, but her expression remained carefully neutral. "Tell him it's not true," Vaelor said. "Tell him Kessa's intelligence is wrong, that your father is dead, that you weren't protecting him." Serapha met his eyes. For 3 seconds that felt like centuries, she said nothing. Then she spoke. Her voice was quiet, controlled, utterly calm. "My father is alive." The words hit like physical force. Vaelor felt the chamber tilt, felt everything he thought he understood about the past 3 months collapse into rubble. "You knew," he said, "the whole time. You knew he was alive, knew he was part of the conspiracy, and you protected him." "Yes," Serapha said. The admission was worse than denial. Denial could be argued with, challenged, broken down through evidence and interrogation, but simple confirmation carried finality, truth that destroyed everything it touched. Why? The question came out raw. Why risk everything? Why expose Faust? Why nearly die proving corruption existed if you were just protecting the real architects? Serapha pushed away from the wall, moved to the window, looked out at the city below. "Because my father made mistakes," she said. "Got greedy. Started expanding the embezzlement beyond what was sustainable. Faust wanted to stop, wanted to consolidate. They disagreed. The conspiracy was fracturing from within." She turned to face Veilor. "So my father sent me to court, gave me evidence against Faust, told me to expose him before he could expose us. Make Faust the villain, make the throne grateful. Position me close to power so when everything collapsed, our family would survive protected." Her voice never wavered. That was somehow worse than emotion, worse than tears or anger or fear. Just clinical explanation of systematic deception. "And you married me," Veilor said. "Became queen. Helped me transform the empire, all while protecting the man who orchestrated the corruption we were supposedly fighting." "Yes," Serapha said. Veilor felt something crack inside his chest, not breaking, shattering, like ice that had been fractured in 1,000 places finally giving way completely. Every lesson he had learned from his father suddenly made terrible sense. Trust was suicide. Love was weakness. Vulnerability was the wound through which kings died. He had ignored those lessons, had chosen to believe Serapha was different. That partnership was possible. That transformation could happen through honesty instead of manipulation. And he had been catastrophically wrong. The realization settled into his bones like poison. Heavy, permanent, true. Vex cleared his throat. The sound pulled Veilor back from the edge of whatever abyss was opening beneath him. "There's more," the commander said. His voice carried reluctance. "Kessa's intelligence indicates Soren Vale is currently in the capital. Has been here for weeks, operating from a safe house in the lower districts, coordinating with counselors who oppose constitutional reform." "Planning what?" Veilor asked. Though he already knew, already felt the trap closing. "Coup," Vex said. "Time to coincide with the Constitutional Assembly's final vote. Designed to look like popular uprising against radical transformation. Designed to remove you and install a regent council controlled by Vale and his allies. How long until they move?" 3 days. Maybe less. Kessa's people intercepted communications but couldn't get precise timing. Veilor processed this. Coup in 3 days. Constitutional vote in 6. Empire balance between transformation and violent fragmentation. And the woman he loved standing 10 feet away, having just admitted she had been playing him from the beginning. The mathematics were brutally simple. He could trust Kessa's intelligence and act against the coup, but acting meant arresting conspirators that might include people Serapha was protecting, might include her father, might force her to choose between family and the throne, or he could doubt the intelligence. Assume this was itself manipulation. More layers to deception that had already proven deeper than he imagined. Either way, trust was impossible. Either way, partnership was dead. Either way, everything they had built together was revealed as foundation laid on lies. Veilor looked at Serapha, at storm-gray eyes that had taught him hope might not be delusion, at the woman who had stood beside him in that arena, who had negotiated with rebels, who had helped him choose transformation over tradition, who had apparently been protecting her father's conspiracy the entire time. "Did you ever love me?" The question came out before he could stop it, raw, vulnerable. Everything kings were supposed to never reveal. Serapha's expression finally cracked. Just slightly, a hairline fracture in her control. "Yes," she said quietly. "I didn't expect to. Wasn't supposed to. But somewhere between your mercy in that arena and your courage at Raven's Edge, I stopped playing a role and started believing we could actually build something real." "Then why?" Veilor asked. "Why not tell me about your father? Why not trust me with the truth?" "Because the truth would have destroyed everything," Serapha said. "You would have arrested him, prosecuted him, made him an example just like Faust, and my family would have been annihilated. Everyone I grew up protecting, everyone I spent 8 years keeping safe. Her voice broke, just slightly. I chose you over them once. When I gave you that evidence, when I exposed Faust knowing it might lead back to my father, that was the first time I ever chose something besides family survival, and it terrified me. It still terrifies me. She stepped closer, close enough Valor could see tears tracking down her face. She was not crying. The tears just fell like something beyond control. So yes, I protected him. Yes, I hid the full truth. Yes, I married you as strategy and stayed as choice. And yes, I love you despite knowing that love might cost me everything. Valor wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that the emotion was real even if the foundation was deception, wanted to think partnership could survive this. But crowns were not built on wanting. They were built on calculation. And the calculation was devastating. Serapha had lied, was still lying. Even this confession was probably incomplete, probably protecting deeper truths that would only emerge when they could do maximum damage. Trust her and risk everything. Doubt her and lose the only person who had ever made him want to be better than his inheritance. The choice was impossible, the kind of choice that destroyed kings regardless of which path they chose. Valor turned to Vex. His voice came out colder than he intended, probably colder than he felt. But cold was survival. Cold was armor against vulnerability that had already proven lethal. Arrest Soren Vale, he ordered. Use Kessa's intelligence to locate his safe house. Bring him in for questioning about the conspiracy and coup planning. Do it tonight, before he can move against us. Vex nodded. And the Queen? Valor looked at Serapha, at the woman who had taught him that powerless people survived through precision, who had survived 8 years documenting corruption while protecting her father, who had married him as strategy and loved him as catastrophe. House arrest, he said. Royal quarters. No communication outside the palace. Guard rotation every 4 hours. She stays there until we sort out what's true and what's performance. Serapha's face went pale. You're imprisoning me. I'm protecting you, Valor said. From yourself. From your father. From choices that will get you killed when this coup collapses. Her eyes held something that might have been betrayal, which was almost funny given the circumstances. Almost. You promised partnership, she said quietly. Promised we would face everything together. That was before I knew partnership was built on lies, Valor said. Before I learned that trust is just weaponized vulnerability. Before you proved my father right about everything. The words landed like blades. He watched them cut, watched Serapha flinch, watched her storm-gray eyes fill with pain that looked genuine but might be performance. He couldn't tell anymore. That was the worst part. Not knowing whether anything had been real or if he had simply been played by someone better at manipulation than he was at detection. Vex moved to escort Serapha out. She went without resistance, stopped at the doorway, looked back at Valor with an expression that carried weight he could not interpret. When you find my father, she said, ask him about the letters. The ones he wrote me after his supposed death. The ones explaining why he faked it, why he built the conspiracy, why he believed corruption was necessary to hold the empire together. Why? Valor asked. Because you'll understand why I protected him, Serapha said. And maybe, just maybe, you'll understand that this situation is more complicated than villain and victim. That survival sometimes requires choosing between impossible options. That powerless people do terrible things to protect the people they love. She paused, just like kings do. Then she left. Vex followed, the door closed, and Valor stood alone in a chamber that suddenly felt vast and empty. He had thought transformation was possible, had believed that empires could change through choice instead of violence, had imagined that partnership could replace domination, but transformation required trust, and trust required honesty. And honesty had apparently been absent from the beginning, which meant everything he built was foundation laid on sand, beautiful architecture destined to collapse the moment pressure tested its integrity. The realization settled into Valor's chest like winter, cold, heavy, permanent. Outside the window, the Constitutional Assembly continued its work. 300 delegates arguing about governance frameworks they believed mattered, building structures they thought might last, not knowing the whole thing was probably collapsing before it ever took root. Valor's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the stone table, felt cold seep into his palms, felt the physical world anchor him against emotional devastation trying to pull him under. Then he did what kings do when everything collapses. He focused on what could be controlled, on immediate threats, on tactical problems with clear solutions. He called for his advisors, assembled military commanders, began planning the operation to arrest Soren Vale and dismantle the coup before it could execute. Work became armor, action became shield, calculation became the only thing standing between composure and complete breakdown. Hours passed, night fell. The palace emptied as delegates returned to temporary quarters. Guards changed rotation. The city settled into uneasy sleep. Valor worked through it all, reading intelligence reports, studying building layouts, identifying entry points and extraction routes, the mechanical process of violence disguised as law enforcement. Vex returned near midnight. His expression carried news before words were spoken. "We found the safe house," he said. "Lower Merchant District, 3-story building. Guards at every entrance. Vale is definitely inside. Kessa's people confirmed it. How many hostiles?" Vex hesitated. "That's the problem. Vale isn't alone. He's meeting with 12 High Council members. The ones who walked out when you dissolved the council. Marin Thos, Drake Venn, others. All of them coordinating coup strategy." Valor processed this. Arresting Vale meant arresting a dozen counselors, meant confirming that the conspiracy extended far beyond embezzlement into active treason, meant civil war was no longer possibility, but certainty. "When do we move?" Valor asked. Vex studied him. "Your Majesty, if we arrest 12 counselors simultaneously, we risk triggering exactly the uprising they're planning. Their territories will interpret it as purge, will mobilize. We could be starting the war we're trying to prevent. Then, what do you recommend?" The commander was quiet for a long moment, then spoke carefully. "Let me approach Vale directly. Alone. Offer negotiation instead of arrest. See if there's a path that doesn't end in mass violence." Valor almost laughed. The sound came out bitter. "You want to negotiate with the man who orchestrated corruption, faked his death, and is currently planning coup? The man who used his daughter as chess piece in conspiracy that nearly destroyed the empire? I want to try talking before we start killing," Vex said, "because killing is easy. It's what we're trained for. But Your Majesty, you didn't dissolve the council and propose constitutional reform because you wanted easy. You did it because you believed something better was possible." He stepped closer. "Don't let Serapha's deception turn you back into your father. Don't let betrayal prove that trust was always suicide. Don't let this moment define you as king who learned the wrong lesson from pain." The words hit harder than they should have. Valor wanted to argue, wanted to prove that Vex was wrong, that trust had been suicide, that his father's cynicism was wisdom he should have never abandoned. But somewhere underneath rage and betrayal and devastating hurt, a different voice whispered. Serapha's voice. From months ago, when he was recovering from wounds Faust inflicted. The crown costs everyone something. The tragedy is not paying the price. The tragedy is forgetting why you paid it. He had paid the price of vulnerability, of trust, of believing partnership was possible. Now came the test. Whether that payment bought transformation or just purchased expensive lesson about why kings ruled alone. Valor looked at Vex, at this military commander who had chosen negotiation over rebellion, who had trusted Valor's promises enough to stand down 3,000 soldiers, who apparently still believed talking was worth attempting. 4 hours, Valor said. You have 4 hours to negotiate with Vale. If you get something workable, we postpone arrests. If not, we move with overwhelming force and accept the consequences. Vex nodded, turned to leave. Commander, Valor called. Vex stopped. One more thing. If Vale asks why you're offering negotiation instead of arrest, tell him the truth. What's that? Tell him his daughter taught me that powerless people survive through precision, and powerful people destroy empires by forgetting that lesson. Tell him I'm trying not to forget. Vex's expression shifted. Something that might have been respect. I'll tell him, he said, then left. Valor waited alone in the war chamber, watching torches burn low, watching shadows grow longer, watching hours crawl past while his empire trembled between transformation and violent collapse. Serapha was imprisoned in the royal quarters. Her father was planning coup. The Constitutional Assembly was building structures that might be obsolete before ratification, and Valor was trying to hold together something that had apparently been fractured from the beginning. The mathematics of power had never felt more brutal. Every choice carried cost. Every decision sacrificed something. Every path forward required becoming someone he either loved or hated. No middle ground. No safe options. Just endless sequence of impossible choices that defined what kind of king he would become. Vex returned 3 hours later. His expression was carefully neutral. That alone told Valor the news was complicated. Vale agreed to meet, the commander said, tomorrow morning. Neutral location. Just you, him, and me. No guards, no weapons. Conversation before violence. He paused. But there are conditions. There always are, Valor said. What does he want? Immunity for Serapha regardless of outcome. Full pardon for anything she did protecting him or the conspiracy. Constitutional guarantee that she faces no prosecution. Valor felt something twist in his chest. Even now, Vale was protecting his daughter, even while planning coup, even while orchestrating treason. Family came first. It was almost admirable. Almost. What else? Vale wants you to understand something before the meeting, wants you to read his letters, the ones Serapha mentioned, the ones explaining why he faked his death, why he built the conspiracy. Vex placed a sealed folder on the table between them. Serapha had these in her quarters. Gave them to me when I informed her about the meeting. Said you needed to read them before making final decisions. Said they would not excuse what her father did, but might explain why he thought it necessary. Valor stared at the folder. Part of him wanted to throw it into the brazier. Watch it burn. Refused to engage with justifications for corruption and deception. But another part, smaller and more dangerous, was curious. Wanted to understand. Needed to know whether there was any logic to the madness, or if this was just evil wrapped in rationalization. He opened the folder. Inside were 12 letters, written in elegant script, dated across 6 years, each one addressed to Serapha at different hiding places, each one signed by her father. Valor read them through the night. They told a story he had not expected, a story of empire collapsing under its own weight long before Valor took the throne, of territories stretched too thin, resources depleted, administrative systems breaking down under corruption that was not conspiracy but structural inevitability. Soren Vale had been High Regent under Valor's father, had watched King Theron conquer through violence and rule through fear, had seen the empire grow beyond sustainable governance, had recognized that conquest created systems designed to fail, so he built alternative structures. Shadow networks, hidden resource redistribution, embezzlement that was actually emergency relief for territories the official system was destroying, corruption that kept people fed when legitimate channels had collapsed. It was not virtue. Vale made that clear in the letters. It was survival, triage, choosing which parts of the empire to save when saving everything was impossible. And when Valor's father died and Valor inherited the throne, Vale saw possibility, saw a young king who might be malleable, who might be guided toward transformation, who might voluntarily dismantle the systems that were killing the empire. But he also saw risk, saw that transformation might threaten his shadow networks, might expose the corruption that was secretly keeping territories alive, might destroy the very mechanisms preventing total collapse. So he faked his death, positioned Serapha to influence the new king, built insurance policies to protect his work, regardless of whether Valor proved reformer or tyrant. The letters did not excuse anything, did not justify deception or conspiracy or using his daughter as political instrument, but they complicated everything, turned simple narrative of villain and victim into something messier, something that forced uncomfortable questions about whether corruption was always evil or sometimes necessary surgery on systems too broken to heal legitimately. Valor finished the last letter as dawn light crept through the war chamber windows. His eyes burned, his head ached. His understanding of power had been fractured and rebuilt so many times he could barely recognize what remained. He looked at Vex, who had waited silently through the entire reading. "Did you know," Valor asked, "about any of this?" "Some," Vex admitted. "Enough to understand Vale is more complicated than simple criminal. Enough to know that if we arrest him, we lose knowledge about shadow systems currently keeping parts of the empire functional. Enough to worry that transformation might destroy mechanisms we do not fully understand. Valor stood, moved to the window, looked down at Verith Keep's lower districts where Sorenvale was hiding, where the Constitutional Assembly would convene in hours, where 300 delegates were trying to build something new from Empire's rubble. All of it balanced on choices Valor made next. Trust Vale's explanation or dismiss it as manipulation. Negotiate or arrest, transform or preserve, partner or dominate. Believe Sarafa loved him or accept she was perfect performance. Every choice carried consequence. Every decision defined what kind of king he would become. And somewhere in the accumulated weight of impossible mathematics, Vialor understood something his father never taught him. Power was not about making right choices. There were no right choices. Just less wrong ones. Just decisions that broke you differently. Just consequences you chose deliberately instead of having them forced upon you. The crown did not make you wise. It just made your mistakes historic instead of personal. Arrange the meeting, Valor said quietly. Tomorrow morning. I'll hear what Vale has to say. Then decide whether transformation can survive this or if betrayal killed it before it ever took root. Vex nodded. One more thing, Your Majesty. What do you want me to tell the Queen? Valor was silent for a long moment, then spoke words that tasted like ash. Tell her I read the letters. Tell her I understand why she protected her father. Tell her understanding is not the same as forgiving. And tell her that when this is over, regardless of outcome, she and I need to have a conversation about whether partnership can survive foundation built on lies. Will she be released from house arrest? Valor met Vex's eyes. After I meet with her father. After I understand the full scope of what was hidden. After I decide whether the woman I love is someone I can trust or someone I need to protect the Empire from, including myself. Vex left to arrange the meeting. Valor stood alone watching dawn paint the capital in shades of copper and gold. The city was waking, people emerging into morning that would define their futures, Constitutional Assembly preparing for sessions that might be interrupted by coup, Empire trembling between transformation and violent fragmentation, and one king trying to decide whether trust was wisdom or suicide, whether love made him stronger or just gave him more to lose. Whether choosing humanity over heritage was revolution or just elaborate path to the same destruction his father avoided through cynicism. The questions had no answers, only consequences that would arrive whether he was ready or not. Somewhere in the royal quarters, Serapha waited under guard, waited to learn whether her confession destroyed everything or somehow, impossibly, opened path towards something more honest than what came before. Somewhere in the lower districts, her father planned coup or negotiation or some third option Valor could not yet imagine. Somewhere in the future, 6 months or 6 days away, the Empire would either transform or collapse, would either prove that choice could replace conquest or demonstrate that kingdoms were just organized violence with prettier names. Vialor did not know which, could not predict outcome, could only choose how he met it, what kind of king he became while the world broke around him. His father had chosen isolation. Domination. Fear sharpened into law and built empire that lasted 1 generation before beginning its dissolution. Valor was choosing something else, something that might be wisdom or might be catastrophic naivety, something that required trusting people who had already proven capable of devastating deception, something that required believing transformation was possible even when every lesson said otherwise. He looked at his reflection in the window glass, saw a king who looked older than 32, saw exhaustion, saw doubt, saw someone trying to hold together empire while his own foundation crumbled, saw someone who had changed so much in 3 months that the man his father raised would not recognize what remained, for better or worse, for transformation or destruction, for partnership that survived betrayal or solitude that survived everything except meaning. The choice was his. The consequence was history. And morning light was coming whether he was ready or not. The meeting place was an abandoned grain warehouse on the edge of Verith Keep's merchant quarter. 3 stories of rotting timber and broken windows. A building that had once fed the Empire, now serving as neutral ground for its potential dismantling. Vialor arrived at dawn with Commander Vex. No guards, no weapons, just 2 men walking into space that could easily become tomb. The warehouse interior smelled like decay and old grain dust. Morning light filtered through gaps in the roof, painting everything in shades of gray and amber. Structural beams cast long shadows across floor littered with debris from decades of neglect. Soren Vale waited at the warehouse center. He was smaller than Vylor expected, mid-60s, silver-haired like his daughter, storm-gray eyes that carried the same devastating intelligence. He wore simple merchant clothing, nothing that marked him as former High Regent, nothing that suggested he had orchestrated conspiracy spanning nearly a decade. He looked like someone's grandfather, harmless, forgettable, exactly the kind of person who survived by being underestimated. "Your Majesty," Vale said. His voice was cultured, calm, the voice of someone who had spent lifetime in council chambers arguing policy. "Thank you for coming. I know trust is difficult given circumstances." "Trust is impossible given circumstances," Valor corrected. "But I came anyway, because the alternative is civil war, and I'd rather exhaust conversation before we start killing each other." Vale smiled slightly. "You sound like your father." He also preferred violence as last resort rather than first response, though he was considerably more comfortable with it than you seem to be. "You knew my father well?" "I served as his High Regent for 12 years, Vale said. Watched him conquer 6 territories through force. Watched him consolidate power through fear. Watched him build empire designed to function through domination. Yes, I knew him well." He gestured to crates arranged like chairs. "Please, sit. This conversation will take time. Might as well be marginally comfortable while we determine whether Nightren survives the week." Valor measured him, looking for tells, signs of deception, anything that indicated this was trap rather than genuine negotiation. He found nothing conclusive, just old man who looked tired, who carried weight in his shoulders that suggested decades of impossible choices, who seemed almost relieved that pretense was finally over. Valor sat. Vex remained standing, positioned where he could see both entrances. Military instinct never entirely dormant. "I read your letters," Valor said. "The ones you sent Serapha. The ones explaining why you faked your death, why you built shadow networks, why you believed corruption was necessary to hold the Empire together." Vale's expression shifted. Not surprise, something closer to relief. "And what did you conclude?" "That you're either complicated villain or pragmatic survivor operating in impossible situation," Valor said. "That embezzlement might have been emergency relief disguised as theft. That your conspiracy might have actually kept territories alive when official systems were failing." He leaned forward. "But also that you used your daughter as political instrument. That you orchestrated deception spanning years. That you're currently planning coup designed to remove me from power. So complexity does not equal innocence. An explanation does not equal justification." Vale nodded slowly. "Fair assessment. Accurate on all counts. I am complicated villain and pragmatic survivor. The embezzlement was emergency relief. The conspiracy kept people fed when your father's empire was actively starving them. And yes, I used Serapha strategically, used her intelligence, her courage, her willingness to sacrifice for family." His voice carried something that might have been regret. "That last part is what haunts me most. Not the corruption, not the deception. Using my daughter as chess piece in games she barely understood. Putting her in positions where she had to choose between protecting me and protecting herself. Making her survival dependent on perfect performance in situations designed to destroy her." He looked at Valor directly. "She loves you, you know. That was never strategy, never performance. She was supposed to influence you, guide you toward policies beneficial to my networks. But falling in love? That was accident. Complication. The thing that made this entire situation infinitely more dangerous than I intended." Valor felt something twist in his chest. The words carried weight that felt genuine. But genuine emotion could still accompany strategic deception, could still be truth deployed as weapon. "If she loves me, why protect you? Why hide conspiracy? Why risk everything we built together?" "Because powerless people learn early that survival requires protecting the people who protect you," Vale said. "Because I raised her after her mother died. Because I taught her that family loyalty matters more than abstract principle. Because she learned from watching me that sometimes you do terrible things to keep the people you love alive." He paused. "She protected me for the same reason you're considering negotiation instead of arrest. Because love makes calculation complicated. Because caring about people creates obligations that override clean decision-making. Because the mathematics of power get messy when emotions enter the equation. Valor wanted to argue, wanted to prove that his choices were different, that strategic negotiation was not the same as protecting criminal conspiracy, that his situation was fundamentally distinct from Serapha's. But the parallel was uncomfortably clear, both of them choosing complexity over simplicity, both of them trying to navigate impossible loyalties, both of them discovering that love did not make you stronger. It just gave you more to lose. The coup, Valor said. Tell me about the coup. Who's involved? What you're planning? Why you think violence is necessary? Vale's expression hardened slightly. There is no coup. Vex stepped forward. His hand moved toward where weapon would normally rest. Our intelligence indicates otherwise. Indicates you're coordinating with 12 High Council members, planning uprising timed to Constitutional Assembly's final vote. Your intelligence is partially correct, Vale said. I am meeting with council members. I'm coordinating strategy, but not coup. Counter-coup. Defense against the actual conspiracy you haven't detected yet. Valor felt cold spread through his chest. Explain. Vale stood, moved to the warehouse's far wall, pulled back canvas covering that had concealed maps and documents, detailed plans, troop movements, communications intercepts. High Counselor Marin Thoss is planning military intervention, Vale said. Has been for weeks. She's coordinating with commanders loyal to the old system, planning to arrest you during Constitutional Assembly, install Regent Council, suspend transformation indefinitely, return Nightren to traditional imperial governance. He pointed to marked positions on the maps. She has 600 soldiers positioned around the capital, another 2,000 in territories within 3 days' march. The Constitutional Assembly is her target. Public gathering, maximum visibility, designed to look like popular uprising against radical change. Valor studied the documents. They carried level of detail that suggested legitimate intelligence. Specific names, unit designations, supply routes, information that would be difficult to fabricate convincingly. If this is true, why not bring it to me directly? Why operate in shadows? Why make yourself look like conspirator? Because half your remaining advisors are compromised, Vale said. Because Marin has people throughout palace administration. Because coming to you openly would have triggered immediate response that warned her. Would have driven conspiracy deeper underground where it could not be monitored. He looked at Valor. I needed you to think I was threat. Needed Marin to believe I was planning coup. Needed everyone focused on wrong conspiracy while I gathered evidence about real one. Needed chaos as cover for intelligence gathering. It was brutally clever, if true. Create fake threat to disguise real investigation. Make yourself appear guilty to maintain freedom of movement. Use conspiracy as camouflage for counter-conspiracy. But it was also perfect cover story if Vale was actually planning coup. Perfect explanation for suspicious activity. Perfect rationalization for meetings with dissident council members. Valor had no way to verify which interpretation was accurate. No way to know if this was truth or elaborate manipulation. No way to trust anything in situation built entirely on deception. Prove it, Valor said. Prove Marin is planning intervention. Prove your conspiracy is counter-conspiracy. Give me something beyond documents that could be forged and maps that could be fabricated. Vale reached into his coat, pulled out small object wrapped in cloth, unwrapped it carefully. A signet ring, gold and obsidian, marked with Marin's family crest. This belonged to Captain Davenport, Vale said, commander of Marin's personal guard. I acquired it 3 days ago when he was found dead in the lower districts. Throat cut, professional execution. His body was staged to look like robbery, but the precision suggested something else. He placed the ring on crate between them. Court was my informant, was feeding me intelligence about Marin's planning. She discovered his betrayal, had him killed, took his signet ring as trophy or warning or both, then discarded it when she realized possession created evidence trail. How did you get it? One of my people retrieved it from the disposal site before it could be destroyed, brought it to me yesterday, along with information that Marin is accelerating her timeline, planning to move against you in 4 days, during the Constitutional Assembly's preliminary vote. 4 days. The same timeline Kessa's intelligence suggested for Vale's supposed coup, The same convergence point where multiple conspiracies apparently collided. It was too convenient, too perfectly aligned, unless both intelligence sources were detecting the same event from different angles. Unless the truth was that everyone was planning something and the only question was who moved first. Valor felt the situation's complexity like physical weight. Every additional layer of information made clarity more elusive. Every explanation created new questions. Every answer suggested deeper deceptions underneath. This was what power felt like when trust was impossible, when every source was potentially compromised, when the mathematics of survival required choosing between bad options and worse ones without reliable information about which was which. His father had solved this problem through isolation, through trusting no one, through making decisions based purely on force projection rather than attempting to navigate loyalty's impossible terrain. Valor had rejected that approach, had chosen partnership, had believed that trust could replace domination. And now he was discovering that trust required verification, that partnership demanded honesty, that transformation needed foundations stronger than hope and strategic deception. "Commander Vex," Valor said. His voice stayed level, but something underneath it had shifted. Harder, colder. "Send word to Captain Rennick. Have him verify Captain Court's death. Confirm timeline. Determine if cause of death matches professional execution. Do it quietly. Through channels Marin cannot monitor." Vex nodded. Left through the warehouse's eastern entrance. His footsteps echoed across broken floorboards until silence returned. Valor turned back to Vale. Just the two of them now. Former High Regent and current King. Two men who had both discovered that survival required becoming people they were not entirely proud of. "Tell me about Serapha," Valor said. "Not strategy, not chess pieces. Tell me about your daughter as person, as woman who documented corruption for 8 years, who risked execution to expose conspiracy, who married me as calculation and loved me as catastrophe." Vale was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried weight that went beyond political maneuvering. "She is best thing I ever created and worst thing I ever did to another human being," he said. "She is brilliant, courageous, capable of surviving situations that would destroy most people. But she is also damaged, scarred by childhood spent learning that survival meant performance, that safety required manipulation, that love was tactical liability rather than source of strength." He looked at Valor with eyes that held genuine pain. "I taught her those lessons, deliberately, systematically, because I believed powerless people needed those skills to survive an empire built on domination. I was not entirely wrong. Those skills kept her alive, kept her functional in Val's household when lesser people would have been destroyed. But I also made her incapable of believing anyone could actually love her for herself rather than what she provided strategically. Made her assume every relationship was transaction. Made her survival dependent on never being fully honest because honesty equaled vulnerability and vulnerability equaled death." His voice broke slightly. "So when she loves you, she does not trust it, does not believe it can be real, assumes it must be performance or delusion or temporary condition that will collapse under pressure. And she protects herself by protecting me because family loyalty is the only form of love she truly believes exists." The words landed like physical blows. Valor felt them impact, felt recognition, felt terrible understanding of why Serapha had chosen as she did. She was protecting the only love she trusted, the only relationship that felt permanent, the only person who had never abandoned her even when abandonment would have been safer. It was not virtue. It was survival instinct carved into someone over decades of impossible choices. It was damage mistaken for strength. It was armor that looked like betrayal. And Valor had responded by imprisoning her, by treating her protection of her father as confirmation that partnership was impossible, by proving through his reaction that her worst fears about vulnerability were correct. He had become the thing she feared most, the person who punished honesty, who made confession into weapon, who demonstrated that trust was suicide disguised as intimacy. The realization settled into his chest like lead, heavy, choking, true. "I need to see her," Valor said. "Need to talk to her. Before any of this goes further, before decisions get made that cannot be unmade." Vale nodded. "But first you need to decide about Marin, about the countercoup, about whether you trust my intelligence or dismiss it as manipulation. Because in 4 days, one of us is moving against you. Either Marin with military intervention or me with conspiracy you cannot yet detect, or both. Your choice determines who survives, who gets arrested, who faces execution. Choose wrong, and the empire fragments. Choose right, and transformation might actually survive. Valor looked at the maps, at the documents, at the signet ring that might be evidence or might be prop in elaborate performance, at the old man who claimed to be protecting him while appearing to threaten everything he had built, at the impossible mathematics of power when trust was tactical liability. There was no good choice, no clean decision, just calculations built on insufficient information and consequences that would arrive regardless. His father would have chosen force, would have arrested both Vale and Marin, would have crushed both conspiracies and sorted truth from deception afterward, would have accepted civilian casualties as price of certainty. Vialor had spent 3 months learning to be different king, learning that force created more problems than it solved. Learning that transformation required trust, even when trust was terrifying. But trust required leap beyond available evidence, required choosing to believe despite reasons for doubt, required making yourself vulnerable to people who had already proven capable of devastating deception. It required becoming person his father would have called fool, or someone his father never imagined possible. When Vex returns with verification about Court's death, "I'll decide," Valor said. "Until then, you stay here, under observation, not arrest, not freedom, supervised neutrality while we determine whether you're ally or threat." Vale accepted this with nod. Expected outcome. Reasonable compromise given circumstances. "But tell me one thing," Valor continued. "If Serapha had to choose between saving you or saving me, who would she choose?" Vale's expression softened, became almost sad. "6 months ago, she would have chosen me without hesitation," he said. "Family above everything. Survival above principle. Protection of the only love she trusted." He paused. "Now? After everything you have shown her? After you chose mercy over murder? After you proposed transformation instead of domination? After you proved that partnership might actually be possible?" His storm gray eyes held weight that felt devastatingly honest. "Now, I genuinely do not know. And that terrifies me more than any coup, because it means she might have learned to trust something besides survival, might have started believing love can exist without transaction, might have become someone I did not raise her to be." He looked at Valor. "Which means you changed her, just like she changed you. Which makes both of you infinitely more dangerous and infinitely more vulnerable than you were before." The words settled between them, heavy with implication, true in ways that made Valor's chest ache. Vex returned 20 minutes later. His expression carried confirmation before words were spoken. "Captain Court is dead," he reported. "Throat cut. Professional execution. Timeline matches Vale's information. Body was staged as robbery, but coroner confirms it was assassination." He paused. "And there's more. We intercepted communications between Marin and Eastern Territory commanders, orders to mobilize troops, converge on capital, prepared for operation during Constitutional Assembly. Everything Vale described checks out. Valor felt the situation crystallize. No longer competing conspiracies of unknown validity. Confirmed threat. Real danger. Marin planning military intervention in 4 days. Which meant Vale was either telling truth about counter-conspiracy or had orchestrated elaborate intelligence operation to appear innocent while planning something worse. Either way, the immediate threat was identified. The immediate choice was clear. Stop Marin's intervention or watch constitutional transformation collapse under military coup. "Arrest Marin," Valor ordered. "Arrest all 12 council members Vale identified. Do it now, before they can mobilize fully, before they can execute whatever they are planning. Use overwhelming force, accept no resistance." Vex hesitated. "Your Majesty, if we arrest 12 councillors simultaneously, we prevent coup," Valor interrupted. "We demonstrate that transformation will not be stopped by people clinging to old systems. We prove that the Crown still has authority, even while voluntarily limiting that authority through constitutional reform." He looked at Vale. "And we test whether your intelligence is genuine or elaborate manipulation. If these arrests prevent coup, you are vindicated. If they trigger the actual conspiracy you have been planning, you have revealed yourself. Either way, we get clarity." Vale smiled slightly. "Dangerous gamble, Your Majesty. Clarity sometimes arrives too late to matter." Everything is dangerous gamble now, Valor said. The question is whether we gamble deliberately or let circumstances gamble for us. He turned to Vex. Go. Move now. I will meet you at the palace within the hour to coordinate response. And Commander, have Royal Guard bring Queen Serapha to the war chamber, under escort but not restrained. It is time she and I had conversation about whether partnership survives foundation built on necessary lies. Vex left. Vale remained under observation of guards who had been positioned outside the warehouse during negotiation. Valor walked into morning light that had grown brighter during the meeting. The city was waking, people emerging into day that would determine their futures, constitutional assembly preparing for session that might be interrupted by military intervention, empire trembling between transformation and violent collapse. And Valor was choosing to trust. Not completely, not blindly, but enough to act on intelligence provided by man who had orchestrated a decade of deception. Enough to believe that complexity might contain truth rather than just layers of manipulation. It was terrifying. It was possibly suicidal. It was everything his father warned against. It was also the only path forward that did not require becoming tyrant. The only choice that preserved possibility of transformation. The only decision that aligned with person he had spent 3 months learning to become. The palace erupted into controlled chaos when Valor arrived. Soldiers mobilizing, communications flying, arrest warrants being executed across the capital. The machinery of imperial authority demonstrating it still functioned even while being voluntarily constrained. Marinthos was arrested in her chambers, went quietly. Her expression carried something that might have been relief that pretense was finally over. She said nothing during arrest, offered no resistance, just allowed herself to be escorted to detention with dignity that suggested she had prepared for this outcome. The other 11 counselors reacted variably. Some resisted, some fled. Some surrendered immediately. By midday, all 12 were in custody, all 12 being questioned about coup planning, all 12 providing information that would take days to fully process. But the immediate threat was contained. The Constitutional Assembly could proceed. Transformation could continue. The Empire had survived another crisis, or had simply postponed inevitable collapse. Hard to tell which. Valor stood in the war chamber watching reports flow in, watching his orders being executed, watching Empire function through his will. It felt hollow, powerful, but empty, like machinery operating without soul, like his father's approach wrapped in rhetoric about partnership and reform. The door opened. Serapha entered flanked by 2 guards. They withdrew to corridor positions, providing privacy while maintaining security. She looked exhausted, storm-gray eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. Her hands trembled slightly, but her posture remained straight. Controlled. The armor she wore to survive impossible situations. Valor looked at her across the war chamber. This woman who had taught him that powerless people survived through precision, who had documented corruption for 8 years, who had married him as strategy and loved him as catastrophe, who had protected her father because family loyalty was the only form of love she truly believed existed. The silence stretched, heavy, full of everything that could not be said easily. I spoke with your father, Valor finally said. His voice came out rougher than intended. Read his letters. Learned about shadow networks. About emergency relief disguised as corruption. About you being positioned as chess piece in games you barely understood. Serapha's expression remained carefully neutral. And what did you conclude? That situation is more complicated than I wanted to believe, Valor said. That your protection of him was not simple betrayal, but impossible choice between 2 forms of love. That I responded to your honesty by punishing you, by proving your worst fears about vulnerability were correct. He stepped closer. That I became exactly the thing you were afraid I would become. The person who made confession into weapon, who treated truth as attack rather than gift. Serapha's control fractured. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Not crying, just tears falling like something beyond control. You imprisoned me, she said quietly. Put me under guard. Treated me like threat rather than partner. After everything we built together. After I chose you over survival. After I risked confession knowing it might destroy us. Her voice broke. You proved that trust is still suicide. That vulnerability still gets punished. That powerless people are still right to protect themselves through deception. The words hit like blades. Valor felt them cut. Felt recognition, felt terrible truth in her accusation. "You are right," he said, "about all of it." I responded to complexity with force, to confusion with control, to betrayal with exactly the domination I claimed to reject. I became my father when I was most afraid of becoming him. He moved closer, close enough to see her breath catch, close enough to feel everything trembling between them. "But you were also right about something you told me months ago, when I was recovering from wounds Faust inflicted. You said the tragedy is not paying the price. The tragedy is forgetting why you paid it." Serafa watched him, waiting. "I paid the price of vulnerability," Valor continued, "of trust, of believing partnership was possible. And when that payment bought pain instead of transformation, I forgot why I made it. Forgot that the goal was not avoiding hurt, but building something worth being hurt for." He took her hands. They were cold despite braziers burning around them. "So I am asking now, not as king, as man who loves you despite knowing love makes everything more complicated. Can partnership survive foundation built on necessary lies? Can trust exist after betrayal? Can we build something honest from rubble of deception?" Serafa looked at their joined hands, then met his eyes. Storm-gray depths held everything she had survived to reach this moment. "I do not know," she said honestly. "I want to believe yes. Want to think love matters more than tactical advantage. Want to imagine we can actually be partners instead of just people using each other strategically." She squeezed his hands. "But I'm terrified. Because believing that requires trusting you will not punish me next time I am honest about impossible choices. Requires trusting that vulnerability is safe. Requires trusting that you meant what you said about transformation mattering more than preservation." Her voice dropped to whisper. "And trust is the hardest thing I have ever attempted. Harder than documenting corruption. Harder than surviving Faust's household. Harder than risking execution. Because all of those were problems I could solve through precision. But trust requires letting go of control. Requires believing in something I cannot verify. Requires faith that you are different than everyone else who taught me survival meant performance." Violor pulled her close, felt her body shake against his, felt her resistance and surrender happening simultaneously, felt everything they were risking pulse between them. "Then let us be terrified together," he whispered. "Let us build trust through accumulated honesty instead of expecting it to exist perfectly from the beginning. Let us accept that partnership surviving betrayal is not instant reconciliation, but daily choice to keep trying, despite fear." Serafa buried her face against his chest. Her tears soaked his shirt. Her breath came ragged. "I love you," she said, "and I am so afraid that love will destroy us both." "Then we will be destroyed together," Valor said, "and that is still better than surviving alone." They stood holding each other while Empire trembled outside. While Constitutional Assembly prepared to vote, while transformation balanced between success and catastrophic failure, the door burst open. Vex entered moving fast. His expression carried urgency that made Valor's blood run cold. "Your Majesty, we have a problem, a severe problem. The arrest triggered exactly what we hoped to prevent." "Show me," Valor ordered. They moved to the War Chamber's observation tower, looked down at the city spreading beneath Vareth Keep, at the Constitutional Assembly Hall where 300 delegates were gathering, at the 600 soldiers surrounding it, not Marin's forces. Those had been neutralized during arrests. Different soldiers, different banners, forces that had been hidden until this moment. Vale's forces. The realization hit like Betrayal's second wave. Vale had told the truth about Marin's conspiracy, had provided genuine intelligence, had positioned himself as ally, but he had also positioned his own forces, had prepared for exactly this moment, had created a situation where removing Marin's threat exposed Valor to different threat entirely. It was layered deception, conspiracy within counter-conspiracy, truth deployed as weapon to create vulnerability that could then be exploited. And Valor had walked directly into it by trusting just enough to act on Vale's intelligence. "The Constitutional Assembly is surrounded," Vex said. "Vale's forces have them contained. No way in or out without fighting through soldiers loyal to old system. Loyal to man who claims to support transformation while actively preventing its completion." Valor felt fury and admiration war in his chest. Vale had played this perfectly, had positioned himself as ally while preparing coup disguised as protection, had used honesty about one conspiracy to conceal another, had proven that trust was still tactical liability, that vulnerability was still exploited, that his father had been right about everything. Serapha stood beside Veilor, watching her father's forces surround the building that represented everything they had tried to build. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I did not know. Did not suspect. I thought if he met with you, if he explained, if he proved himself useful, maybe he actually wanted transformation to succeed." She looked at Veilor with eyes that held devastation. "I was wrong. About him. About what he wanted. About everything. And now we are all going to die because I wanted to believe family could be something besides tactical advantage." Veilor pulled her close, kissed her forehead, felt her trembling, then kissed her properly. Fierce, desperate, full of everything words could not carry. When he pulled back, his voice was steady. "No one is dying today," he said, "except possibly me. And that is acceptable price for proving transformation is worth fighting for." He turned to Vex. "Assemble every loyal soldier we have, every guard who swore oath to the crown rather than individual counselors, every wolf who believes constitutional reform matters more than preserving old systems." "How many is that?" Vex asked. Veilor looked at the forces surrounding the assembly hall, at 600 soldiers loyal to Veil, at Empire fracturing along fault lines that had existed since his father's first conquest. "Enough," he said, "or not nearly enough. We will find out." He moved toward the door. Serapha caught his arm. "Where are you going?" "To the Constitutional Assembly," Veilor said, "to stand with delegates who believe transformation was possible, to prove that kings can actually change, to demonstrate that partnership survives betrayal or dies trying, but never surrenders without fight." He looked at her directly. "And I am going to offer your father one final choice. Stand down and face justice, or prove that family loyalty matters more than Empire's survival. Force his daughter to watch him destroy everything she helped build. Make her live with consequences of his calculation. Either way, this ends today. Either with transformation or blood. Either with partnership or domination. Either with proof that change is possible or confirmation that empires only fall, never transform." His voice hardened. "Assemble the soldiers," he told Vex. "We move in 10 minutes. Anyone not ready stays behind. Anyone who hesitates dies. Anyone who runs gets exactly what they deserve. This is the moment where we learn what we are actually made of, where crowns prove themselves worth wearing or get torn off by people tired of being crushed underneath them." He looked at Serapha one final time. "I love you," he said, "regardless of what your father has done, regardless of what happens next. That is the only truth that matters anymore." Then he walked out into morning light that had turned sharp and cold, into city holding its breath, into empire trembling on the edge of transformation or apocalypse. And Veilor understood with devastating clarity that this was the moment his entire reign had been building toward. The point where every choice converged, where every sacrifice would either prove meaningful or be revealed as delusion, where kings became legends or corpses, where empires transformed or burned, where love either survived betrayal or proved insufficient against reality's brutal mathematics. The Constitutional Assembly waited. Veil's forces surrounded it. 300 delegates trapped inside while 600 soldiers prevented transformation's completion. And one king walking toward them with whatever forces remained loyal, with whatever courage he could muster, with whatever hope survived the accumulated weight of impossible choices. The final battle was coming, not between armies, between visions of what empire could become, between those who believed change was possible and those who knew preservation was safer, between the man Veilor's father raised him to be and the man Serapha had taught him he could become. Only one would survive. Only one vision would define Nightren's future. Only one choice would determine whether 3 months of transformation had been revolution or just elaborate path to the same destruction his father avoided through cynicism. Veilor drew his sword as he walked toward the assembly hall. The blade caught morning light, reflected it across stone and steel and faces of wolves watching from windows. Behind him, loyal soldiers assembled. Not enough, never enough, but enough to try, enough to fight, enough to prove that transformation was worth dying for even if it was not worth living through. Ahead, Veil's forces waited. Professional, disciplined, ready for violence they had prepared for while pretending to support peace. And between them, the The Constitutional Assembly. 300 delegates who had believed partnership was possible, who had spent weeks building frameworks for governance that did not require domination, who had trusted that empire could change, who were about to discover whether that trust was wisdom or suicide. Vaelor reached the perimeter. Vale's soldiers blocked his path. Their commander stepped forward. Older wolf, scarred, competent, the kind of soldier who had survived decades by choosing battles carefully. Your Majesty, the commander said, High Regent Vale offers terms. Stand down. Return to the palace. Allow him to address the Constitutional Assembly. No violence necessary. No bloodshed required. Just conversation about Empire's future. Tell Vale he can deliver terms himself, Vaelor said. Face to face. Like men rather than through soldiers positioned as shields. The commander hesitated, then spoke into communication device, waited for response. Nodded. High Regent agrees, he said. He will meet you at the Assembly Hall's main entrance. Alone. No weapons. Conversation before violence. The soldiers parted, creating corridor toward the building they surrounded. Vaelor walked through it, every step measured, every breath controlled, every instinct screaming that this was trap. But traps were only effective if you refused to enter them. Sometimes transformation required walking into danger deliberately, required choosing vulnerability as strategy, required proving that courage was not absence of fear, but action despite it. Soren Vale waited at the Assembly Hall entrance. He looked older than he had at the warehouse, more tired, like the weight he carried had grown heavier during hours between meetings. Your Majesty, he said, we meet again, under less pleasant circumstances. You surrounded the Constitutional Assembly with soldiers, Vaelor said, after providing intelligence that helped me arrest Marin's conspirators, after positioning yourself as ally, after your daughter risked everything to make me trust you. His voice hardened. Explain why I should not kill you where you stand. Vale's expression remained calm, almost sad. Because killing me achieves nothing. My forces still surround this building. My soldiers still prevent transformation's completion. My control still determines whether delegates live or die. He gestured at the assembled wolves surrounding them. But more importantly, because you are not man who kills without understanding. Not anymore. You changed yourself, became different king, cannot reverse that transformation just because circumstances prove difficult. So I am offering explanation before violence, offering truth before consequences, offering you chance to understand why necessary evil sometimes requires opposing the very transformation you claim to support. Vaelor felt cold settle into his bones, heavy, permanent, the cold of someone realizing the trap was deeper than imagined. Speak, he said. You have until my soldiers arrive. Then we fight. Then we learn whether your forces are better prepared than mine. Then transformation either survives or dies, but at least dies honestly. Vale nodded, took breath like someone preparing for confession. The Constitutional Assembly cannot succeed, he said. Not because I oppose reform, but because reform is not sufficient for Empire's survival. Because Nightrend is not failing because of governance structures. It is failing because the entire foundation is collapsing. Because conquest created systems that were always temporary. Because holding 9 territories together requires either domination or something that has never existed. He looked at Vaelor. You are trying to build federation from Empire's ruins, trying to create partnership from domination, trying to prove that transformation is possible. And I admire that. Genuinely. You have become better king than your father, better man than I ever was. His voice hardened. But you are also naive, because you think good intentions and constitutional frameworks will hold together territories that hate each other, that spent centuries warring before your father conquered them, that only unified because conquest forced unity. Remove the crown's absolute authority and they fracture, immediately, violently, into 9 separate territories that will destroy each other within months. Your transformation does not save the empire. It enables its disintegration while calling disintegration liberation. The words hit harder than they should have, because part of Vaelor feared exactly that. Feared that constitutional reform was just elaborate collapse. That partnership would prove impossible when territories no longer had central authority forcing cooperation. That his father had been right, that empires required domination, that attempting anything else was idealism that got everyone killed. So what do you propose? Vaelor asked. More shadow networks? More corruption disguised as relief? More conspiracy designed to hold together empire by any means necessary? Vale smiled sadly. I propose accepting that empire's time has ended, that 9 territories should separate, that Nightrend should dissolve peacefully before it tears itself apart violently, that you should oversee controlled collapse instead of pretending transformation is possible. He gestured at the assembly hall. These delegates believe they are building something new, but they are actually arguing over how to arrange furniture while the house burns. Better to evacuate orderly than die insisting the structure can be saved. It was elegant, rational, brutally pragmatic, and everything Valor had spent 3 months learning to reject. Because accepting Vale's logic meant accepting that transformation was impossible. That attempt to change empire was always delusion. That his father's cynicism was wisdom he should have never abandoned. Meant accepting that Serapha's courage had been wasted. That her 8 years of documentation led nowhere. That her belief in him was misplaced faith that bought only pain. Meant accepting that love was tactical liability. That trust was suicide. That partnership was impossible in a world built on domination. And Valor could not accept that. Would not. Refused to let empire's failure define what humanity was capable of becoming. You are wrong, he said quietly, about all of it. Yes, the territories might fracture. Yes, cooperation will be difficult. Yes, transformation might fail. But attempting transformation is still better than accepting collapse as inevitable. He stepped closer to Vale. Close enough to see every line carved into the older man's face by decades of impossible choices. Because if we do not try, we prove that empires can only fall, that change is impossible, that domination is the only language power speaks, and that makes every future empire the same as every past one, makes every king the same tyrant, makes every attempt at partnership into delusion waiting to be destroyed by reality. His voice rose. I would rather die trying to prove you wrong than survive confirming you are right. Would rather watch empire collapse during honest transformation than preserve it through continued domination. Would rather become the fool who believed in partnership than the pragmatist who accepted that cruelty was the only sustainable system. He drew his sword. The blade sang against scabbard. So here are my terms. Withdraw your forces. Allow the Constitutional Assembly to complete its work. Accept that transformation will either succeed or fail based on merit rather than being strangled before birth. Or we fight. Here. Now. And let history judge whether attempting change was wisdom or catastrophe. Vale looked at him for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted. Not surrender. Recognition. You really have changed, he said quietly. You are not your father's son anymore. Are not the king I expected. Are someone I did not account for. He drew his own blade, which makes you too dangerous to allow survival, because if you succeed, you prove transformation is possible, prove that empires can change, prove that my entire life's work was unnecessary cruelty instead of required pragmatism. Cannot allow that. Cannot accept that every terrible thing I did was choice rather than necessity. His eyes held something that might have been regret. So we fight. Not because I want to, because you leave me no alternative except admitting I was wrong. And that is the one thing powerful people can never afford. Behind Valor, soldiers arrived. His forces. Not enough, but enough to try. Around the assembly hall, Vale's soldiers prepared for violence. Enough to win. Maybe. And between them, empire trembled. Constitutional Assembly trapped inside. 300 delegates waiting to learn whether transformation survived or died. Whether partnership was possible or delusion. Whether love mattered more than power. Whether change could happen or was always crushed by people too invested in preservation to risk anything new. The morning light turned sharp and cold. Steel reflected it across faces and bodies and ground about to become battlefield. And Valor understood that this was the moment. The point where every choice converged. Where transformation either proved itself or died trying. Where he became legend or corpse, but either way became something his father never imagined possible. Someone willing to die for belief that empire could become something besides organized domination wearing ceremonial robes. He raised his sword, felt weight of steel, felt weight of crown, felt weight of every impossible choice that brought him to this moment, then spoke words that would either save Nightrend or condemn it, for transformation, for partnership, for the possibility that we can become better than our inheritance, for every person who believes change is worth dying for. He looked at Vale directly. And for your daughter, who taught me that powerless people survive through precision, but powerful people destroy empires by forgetting that lesson. She deserves a world where her courage matters, where her honesty is rewarded, where love is not tactical liability. His voice became steel. So let us see which of us builds that world, and which of us dies preventing it. The swords came up. The soldiers moved forward. The battle was beginning. An empire's future balanced on edge of blade, about to be tested against everything trying to preserve the past. Steel met steel before the first word finished echoing across stone. Vale moved fast for a man in his 60s. Decades of survival had taught him that hesitation was death. His blade came high and precise, aimed for Valor's throat with the efficiency of someone who had killed before politics became his primary weapon. Valor blocked. The impact jolted through his arm, reminded him that this was not ceremonial combat or arena spectacle. This was two men fighting for competing visions of what empire could become, and only one vision would survive the morning. Around them, soldiers crashed together. The sound was horrific, steel on steel, bodies hitting stone, screams of wolves who had chosen sides in war that should never have been necessary. War that happened because transformation always threatened someone's power, always required blood payment, always demanded proving that change was worth dying for. Valor and Vale separated, circled each other while chaos erupted around them. The Constitutional Assembly building loomed behind Vale's forces. Inside, 300 delegates waited to learn if their work mattered, if constitutional frameworks they had built over weeks of argument would ever see implementation or just become historical footnote about idealism crushed by pragmatism. "You fight well," Vale said between heavy breaths. "Your father trained you personally. I remember watching those lessons. Watching him teach you that power required capacity for violence, that kings who could not kill became corpses who tried diplomacy." He was right about that much, Valor said. Kings need capacity for violence. But he was wrong about when to deploy it, wrong about making violence the first response instead of last resort, wrong about confusing brutality with strength. Vale attacked again. 3 quick strikes that forced Valor backward. The older wolf was tiring, but desperation made him dangerous, made him willing to sacrifice defense for offense, made him fight like someone who had already accepted death but refused to die quietly. "Philosophy does not win wars," Vale said. "Good intentions do not hold empires together. Love does not prevent territories from tearing each other apart when central authority dissolves." He pressed harder, drove Valor toward the assembly building's wall, close enough that Valor could see delegates watching through windows, could see their faces, young and old, from territories that had spent centuries hating each other, sitting together, building together, believing together that something better was possible. That sight gave Valor strength that went beyond muscle, beyond training, beyond anything his father taught him. It gave him certainty that what he was fighting for mattered more than preservation, that attempting transformation was worth blood payment, that becoming someone who believed in partnership was worth dying to protect. He shifted his stance, stopped retreating, met Vale's attack with calculated aggression that reversed the momentum. "You are right that philosophy does not win wars," Valor said as their blades clashed, "but purpose determines whether victory means anything. My father won every battle and built empire that started dying the moment he did. Because domination creates nothing sustainable, just temporary control maintained through constant violence." He drove Vale backward, forced the older wolf toward his own soldiers who were locked in brutal combat with Valor's forces. "I would rather lose while building something that might outlast me than win while ensuring empire becomes my tomb." Their swords locked, close enough that Valor could see exhaustion in Vale's storm-gray eyes, could see understanding, could see recognition that this fight had only one possible ending. Vale broke the lock, stumbled backward. His breathing was ragged now, uncontrolled, the breathing of someone whose body was betraying him. "You really believe it," he said quietly. "Believe transformation is possible. Believe partnership can replace domination. Believe love matters more than tactical advantage." Something in his expression cracked. "My daughter believes it too. I see it in how she speaks about you, how she changed under your influence, how she started trusting something besides survival." He lowered his sword slightly. I taught her that trust was suicide, that vulnerability was weakness, that powerless people survived through precision and calculation. Taught her those lessons because I believed Empire required them, because I thought preparing her for brutal reality was greater love than protecting her from it. His voice broke. But you taught her something else. Taught her that trust could exist, that vulnerability could be strength, that love might actually matter. And that makes you either wisest king Nightrend has ever seen or most dangerous fool who ever wore crown. Violor kept his blade raised but did not attack. Around them, the battle was turning. His forces were outnumbered but fighting with conviction that went beyond following orders. Fighting for idea that transformation mattered, that Empire could change, that their children might inherit something besides endless cycle of conquest and rebellion. Vale's soldiers were fighting from obligation, from loyalty to old systems, from fear that change meant losing everything they had built from Empire's current structure. Conviction was winning, slowly, brutally, but winning. Vale saw it too, saw his forces faltering, saw the battle's outcome becoming clear, saw transformation surviving despite his attempt to strangle it. Finish it, he said to Veilor. End this. Prove your transformation survives by killing the man who tried to prevent it. Demonstrate that new Empire is different from old one, even while using the same methods. Veilor raised his sword. Could end this easily. One strike. Vale was exhausted, defenseless, already defeated. Killing him would be justice, would be protection, would be demonstration that transformation had teeth, that choosing partnership did not mean accepting weakness, that new Empire could defend itself against those who preferred domination. It would be exactly what his father taught him, exactly what old Empire required, exactly what every instinct said was necessary for survival. But it would also prove Vale's point, prove that transformation was just domination with different rhetoric, prove that Empire could not actually change, prove that attempting partnership always collapsed back into violence when pressure tested its integrity. Veilor lowered his sword. The movement shocked everyone watching, shocked his own soldiers who paused mid-combat, shocked Vale's forces who hesitated, shocked Vale himself whose expression shifted from resignation to confusion. No, Violor said, I will not kill you, will not prove transformation through murder, will not demonstrate that new Empire is different by using old Empire's methods. He stepped back, created space between them. You wanted me to become my father, wanted me to prove that idealism fails when reality intrudes, wanted to demonstrate that Empire requires brutality, that kings who choose mercy become corpses who believe too much. His voice carried across the battlefield, loud enough that fighting stopped, loud enough that everyone could hear, loud enough that delegates inside the assembly hall pressed against windows. But I refuse. Refuse to let your cynicism define what is possible. Refuse to accept that attempting change means becoming the thing I am trying to transform. Refuse to kill you when keeping you alive proves something more important than victory. He looked at Vale directly. You will face trial, will answer for conspiracy and coup planning, will be judged by the same constitutional frameworks you tried to prevent, will either be convicted by legitimate process or vindicated if your defense proves compelling. That is what transformation looks like. That is what justice means when Empire actually changes. Vale stared at him. Something in his expression shifted. Not quite defeat, not quite relief. Something more complicated. You are making a mistake, he said quietly. Pragmatic kings would kill me, would eliminate threat permanently. Your mercy will be interpreted as weakness, will embolden others to challenge transformation, will prove that new Empire cannot defend itself. Probably, Veilor agreed, but killing you would prove Empire has not changed, that transformation was performance, that partnership was rhetoric covering same domination. He raised his voice again so everyone could hear. I am choosing to trust that legitimate process works better than murder, that constitutional frameworks we built can actually deliver justice, that Empire can defend itself through law rather than constant violence, that transformation is real. He looked at his soldiers, at Vale's forces, at wolves who had been killing each other moments before. The battle is over. Put down your weapons. We won this fight through conviction, not violence. Through proving transformation matters enough to die for, but also matters enough to stop killing for. Through demonstrating that new empire is actually different. For a long moment, no one moved. The battlefield held its breath, waited to see if conviction was stronger than momentum, if belief could actually stop violence once started, if transformation was real or just sophisticated performance. Then Vex lowered his weapon. Other loyal soldiers followed, slowly, reluctantly, but following. Vale's forces looked at their commander, waited for his signal, waited to see if Old Wolf had more fight left, or if surrender was the pragmatic choice. Vale looked at Valor for a long moment, then nodded slowly, lowered his sword, let it fall from exhausted fingers and clatter against stone. "Stand down," he ordered his forces. "The battle is lost. The king has proven something I did not think possible. Has demonstrated that mercy can be strength, that transformation might actually be real, that empire might actually change." He met Valor's eyes, storm gray depths holding something that might have been respect. "My daughter chose well," he said quietly. "Chose better king than I could have become, better man than I ever was. I am glad her courage was not wasted, glad her belief in you was justified, glad she will see transformation succeed where I believed it would fail." His voice dropped to whisper only Valor could hear. "Protect her. From people like me. From cynicism that destroys hope. From pragmatism that mistakes cruelty for wisdom. Promise me that much." Valor met his eyes. Saw a father who had damaged daughter while trying to protect her. Saw a man who had built conspiracy because he believed it was necessary. Saw someone who had made terrible choices from combination of fear and love and broken understanding of what survival required. "I promise," Valor said, "but you will protect her too. By standing trial, by accepting judgment, by proving that powerful people can actually face consequences. That will protect her more than any conspiracy ever could." Vale nodded slowly, then allowed himself to be taken into custody. His soldiers surrendered. Weapons clattered to stone. The battlefield went quiet. The Constitutional Assembly doors opened. 300 delegates emerged, some crying, some celebrating, all of them having witnessed transformation survive its greatest test, having watched empire choose justice over murder, having seen conviction prove stronger than cynicism. Among them was Serapha. She had been inside with the delegates, had watched through windows as father and husband fought, as empire trembled, as transformation nearly died but somehow survived. She walked toward Valor across battlefield littered with wounded but not corpses, across stone stained with blood but not death, across space between domination and partnership that empire had just chosen to cross. When she reached him, her storm gray eyes held everything words could not carry. Relief, terror, love, gratitude, fury. All of it compressed into expression too complicated for language. "You spared him," she said. "After everything. After conspiracy and deception and coup. You chose mercy." Valor pulled her close, felt her body shake against his, felt her breath ragged against his neck, felt everything they had survived pulse between them. "I chose transformation," he said quietly. "Chose proving that empire can actually change. Chose demonstrating that partnership is real. Chose believing that your 8 years of documentation and your courage and your love were building something that mattered." He pulled back, met her eyes. "Your father will face trial, will answer for his choices, will be judged by constitutional frameworks we built together. That is what justice means in empire that actually transformed. Not murder disguised as necessity. Legitimate process that treats powerful and powerless the same." Serapha kissed him. Fierce, desperate, full of everything that had brought them to this moment. When she pulled back, tears tracked down her face, but her expression held something that might have been peace. "I love you," she said. "And I'm finally starting to believe that love is not tactical liability. That trust is possible. That we might actually build something that survives us both." The Constitutional Assembly reconvened 3 days later, this time without soldiers surrounding it, without conspiracies threatening its completion, without violence hovering over every decision. Just 300 delegates building frameworks for governance that did not require domination, that allowed territories autonomy while maintaining cooperation, that proved empire could transform into federation through choice rather than dying through violence. The vote came after 6 weeks of debate, after countless amendments, After compromises that satisfied no one completely but everyone enough. After proving that partnership was messy and frustrating and infinitely better than the alternative, the Constitutional Compact passed, not unanimously, but with sufficient majority that legitimacy was clear, that transformation had succeeded, that empire had actually changed. Nightrend became federation of 9 territories with shared governance and regional autonomy, with constitutional limits on royal authority and protections for individual rights, with independent judiciary and elected regional councils, with everything that made power accountable instead of absolute. Vaelor's crown changed that day, stopped being symbol of domination and became symbol of service, stopped representing authority maintained through fear and started representing commitment to legitimate process, stopped being inheritance from father who built empire and became choice to build something better from its ruins. The transformation was not perfect. Some territories struggled with autonomy. Some regional councils failed spectacularly. Some compromises proved unsustainable and required renegotiation. Some people who had thrived under old system lost everything under new one. But transformation was never about perfection. It was about proving change was possible. That empire could evolve. That domination was choice, not destiny. That future could be different from past. 6 months after the battle at the Constitutional Assembly, Vaelor stood with Serapha overlooking Vareth Keep's gardens. Winter had given way to spring. Snow had melted. Silver blossoms covered trees that had been barren during conspiracy and coup. The city below looked different. Not physically, but atmosphere had changed. Fear had diminished. Not disappeared, but diminished enough that people walked differently, talked differently, carried themselves like citizens instead of subjects. Your father's trial concluded yesterday, Vaelor said. The independent tribunal reached verdict. Serapha tensed. What was judgment? Guilty of conspiracy and corruption, acquitted of coup charges due to evidence suggesting he was actually attempting counter-coup, sentenced to 20 years house arrest with mandatory service advising constitutional reform implementation, all assets seized and redistributed to territories his embezzlement damaged. She exhaled slowly. He lives, Vaelor confirmed. And he serves, pays restitution through expertise rather than death, faces consequences through accountability rather than execution. That is what justice means in Federation we built. Serapha leaned against him. Her body was warm despite spring breeze. Do you regret it? She asked. Sparing him. Choosing mercy over pragmatism. Proving transformation through process rather than violence. Vaelor was quiet for a long moment, thinking about question that went deeper than individual case. Question about whether empire could actually change, or if transformation was delusion that survived only because reality had not tested it sufficiently. Every day, he admitted. I regret it every day. Wonder if mercy was wisdom or catastrophic mistake. Wonder if your father's cynicism was correct. If empire requires brutality. If attempting partnership was idealism that will collapse under pressure. He turned to face her. But I also know that if I had killed him, I would have proven his point. Proven that transformation was impossible. Proven that empire could not actually change. Proven that attempting partnership always collapsed into domination when tested, and that would have destroyed something more important than security. What? Hope, Vaelor said. Hope that future can be different from past. That power does not have to corrupt completely. That love matters more than tactical advantage. That we can become better than our inheritance. He touched her face, felt warmth of her skin against his palm. You gave me that hope. When you documented corruption for 8 years, when you risked execution to expose conspiracy, when you chose honesty over self-preservation, when you taught me that powerless people survive through precision, but powerful people destroy empires by forgetting that lesson. His voice softened. So no, I do not regret sparing your father, because that choice honored everything you taught me, everything we built together, everything that makes transformation worth attempting even when success is uncertain. Serapha kissed him, soft, certain, full of everything that had survived impossible journey. When she pulled back, her expression held peace that went beyond relief. Peace that came from finally believing that trust was possible, that vulnerability could be strength, that love might actually matter more than survival. The empire will remember you, she said, as king who chose transformation over preservation, who proved change was possible, who demonstrated that partnership could replace domination. Violor smiled, tired, genuine. The smile of someone who had survived becoming person his father never imagined possible. The Empire will remember us, he corrected, as partners who chose each other despite every lesson saying trust was suicide, who built Federation from Empire's ruins, who proved that powerful and powerless could actually work together when both were willing to be honest. He looked at the city spreading beneath them, at Federation taking shape, at territories learning to cooperate, at future that was uncertain but no longer predetermined. That is legacy worth leaving, he said, not empire that lasts forever through domination, but attempt to build something better that might fail, but at least fails honestly. That makes trying valuable, even if success is temporary. They stood together watching spring reshape the world, watching transformation take root in ways that would not be clear for years, watching empire become something his father would not recognize and Valor would not apologize for creating, because true strength was not in dominating perfectly. It was in attempting transformation, knowing failure was possible. It was in choosing vulnerability when isolation was safer. It was in building partnerships when domination was easier. It was in becoming someone who believed empire could change, and then proving that belief through accumulated choices that honored humanity over heritage. Violor had been king for 11 years when transformation began, had ruled through fear and calculation and isolation his father taught him was necessary. But somewhere between Serapha's courage and his own exhaustion with becoming person he hated, he had learned different lesson, had learned that crown was not destiny, that power was choice, that empire could evolve if someone was brave enough to start the process and stubborn enough to survive it. The Federation would face challenges, would struggle with autonomy, would argue endlessly about implementation, would prove messy and frustrating and infinitely complicated. But it would prove that change was possible, that empire could transform, that domination was not the only language power spoke, that future could be chosen rather than inherited, and that was enough. Not perfect, not certain, not guaranteed to last, but enough to make the attempt worth making, enough to honor everyone who believed transformation mattered, enough to prove that becoming better than your inheritance was possible even when everything said otherwise. Violor looked at Serapha, at woman who had arrived as decoration and become his salvation, who had taught him that precision mattered, that evidence was power, that love was worth risking everything to protect. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For teaching me that trust is not suicide, that vulnerability is not weakness, that partnership is possible even when foundation is built on necessary lies. For believing I could become someone different than my father raised me to be." He pulled her close. "For loving me despite knowing exactly what it would cost us both." Serapha held him, her heartbeat steady against his chest, her breath warm against his neck, her presence the only certainty that mattered anymore. "The cost was worth it," she whispered. "Every terrible choice, every impossible decision, every moment of terror and doubt and wondering if we would survive, all of it worth it. Because they had survived, had built something from empire's ruins, had proven that transformation was possible even when cynicism said otherwise, had demonstrated that choosing humanity over heritage was revolution that actually mattered. The spring wind carried scent of silver blossoms across the gardens, carried sound of city waking into future they had chosen, carried weight of history being written by people who refused to accept that empire's nature was fixed, who believed change was worth attempting even when success was uncertain, who proved that courage was not absence of fear but decision to try anyway. And somewhere in the accumulated weight of impossible choices and devastating consequences and stubborn refusal to surrender hope, Valor understood the final lesson of the crown. Dominance could build empires, but only trust prevented them from becoming tombs. Only partnership created something worth inheriting. Only love made power mean anything beyond capacity for violence. That was the truth his father never taught him. The truth Serapha demonstrated through 8 years of documentation and 1 moment of devastating honesty. The truth that empire either learned or died. Valor had learned, had changed, had become king who chose transformation over preservation even when preservation was safer. And that made him something his father never imagined and his empire desperately needed. Someone willing to believe that future could be different, Someone brave enough to attempt it. Someone stubborn enough to survive the attempt. Someone human instead of just wearing crown. That was the revolution. That was the transformation. That was the legacy worth leaving. Not empire that lasted forever, but honest attempt to build something better that honored everyone crushed under domination's weight. That proved change was possible. The demonstrated partnership was real. That made trying valuable even when success was uncertain. That made survival mean something beyond another day wearing crown that demanded becoming monster. Vialor held Serapha as spring settled across Nightrend, as Federation took shape, as transformation survived its birth and began the messy process of actually functioning, and felt, for first time in 11 years of rule, that the crown was not burden he carried alone, that power was not isolation, that surviving meant something beyond just not dying. It meant building something worth the cost, something that honored everyone who believed, something that proved empire could become federation and domination could become partnership and love could matter more than tactical advantage. That was enough. That was everything. That was the only victory that actually mattered. And standing there with the woman who had changed him and the empire they had transformed together, Vialor finally understood what his father never learned. The crown survived through calculation, but kingdoms survived through choice. And the difference between the two determined whether power created tombs or built futures worth inheriting. They had chosen, had survived, had proven that transformation was possible when people were brave enough to attempt it. That was the story Nightrend would remember. Not perfect, not certain, but honest. And honesty was the one thing Empire had needed most. The one thing that made all the rest possible. The one thing that transformed domination into partnership and crown, into commitment and power, into purpose. That was the resolution. That was the ending. That was the truth that survived everything trying to destroy it. Empire could change. Partnership was possible. Love mattered more than fear. And sometimes, against every instinct power taught, choosing humanity over heritage was the most revolutionary act imaginable.